Jungkook, stop! Jimin's voice cracked the second the stage platform started rising inside Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas. Thousands of armies were screaming under the blinding lights of the BTS 2026 World Tour, but backstage nobody was moving anymore. RM stared at the monitor with a frozen expression. Jin slowly covered his mouth. Taehyung whispered, "He's really gonna do this." And then Jungkook grabbed Jimin's wrist in front of everyone on stage, and the entire stadium suddenly went silent. Welcome back to Bangtan Stories Army. Before we start, I need to ask you something. If someone you trusted forced you to keep smiling while hiding pain in front of millions of people, would you forgive them? And where are you watching from tonight? Tell me in the comments below, because this story changed the way armies looked at BTS forever. Las Vegas was supposed to be BTS's biggest concert of 2026. Every ticket sold out in minutes. Fans flew in from all over the world just to see the group perform together again after months of rumors, pressure, and exhaustion behind the scenes. But nobody inside that stadium knew one terrifying truth. Just 3 hours before the concert started, Jimin could barely stand during rehearsal. He kept hiding his condition behind smiles while Hype staff pushed the show forward like nothing was wrong. Jungkook noticed everything. The shaking hands, the forced smile. The moment Jimin almost collapsed near the backstage stairs. And what Jungkook decided to do during the live performance that night didn't just shock BTS members, it nearly exposed a secret the group had been hiding for months. The hallway behind the main stage was colder than usual that night. Staff members were rushing in every direction with tablets, microphones, backup outfits, and last-minute stage notes, while the sound of 70,000 fans echoed through the walls of Allegiant Stadium like non-stop thunder. Usually Jimin loved this part. He always said the chaos before a concert made him feel alive. But tonight he was sitting alone near the LED control cases with one hand pressed tightly against his side while trying to steady his breathing before anyone noticed. His in-ear monitor rested loosely around his neck, and sweat kept sliding down the side of his face, even though the air conditioning backstage was freezing. "Jimin!" The voice came quietly from behind him. "Jungkook." Jimin immediately straightened his posture and forced a smile before turning around. "Why are you sneaking around like that?" he joked softly. But Jungkook didn't smile back. His eyes dropped instantly toward Jimin's trembling hand. "You can't even hide it anymore." Jimin looked away fast. "I'm fine." "No, you're not." "I said I'm okay." Jungkook stepped closer, too close. Close enough to notice the tension in Jimin's jaw every time he inhaled. "You almost fell during rehearsal. Nobody saw. I saw." The sentence landed hard between them. For a second, neither of them moved. Around them, the noise backstage kept getting louder, but the silence between the two felt heavier than everything else combined. Jimin laughed quietly, trying to brush it off. "You worry too much." Jungkook's expression darkened instantly. "And you lie too easily." Before Jimin could answer, a manager suddenly rushed into the hallway, holding a headset against his ear. "Jimin, wardrobe change moved up 10 minutes. We need you near stage B now." Jimin stood immediately, but the second he did, his balance shifted just slightly. Small enough that nobody else would have noticed. But Jungkook grabbed his arm before he could stumble forward, their eyes locked. You're not performing tonight." Jimin pulled his arm away immediately. "Don't start. I'm serious and I'm fine. You're shaking because everyone's stressed." "No," Jungkook lowered his voice. "Because you're hurt." Jimin's face hardened instantly. "Keep your voice down." That reaction alone told Jungkook everything. He wasn't imagining it anymore. Something was seriously wrong. The manager turned back impatiently. "Guys, we don't have time." Jimin nodded quickly and started walking again before Jungkook could stop him. But Jungkook stayed frozen in the hallway, watching Jimin disappear into the moving crowd of staff and dancers. Something felt wrong. Not normal tour exhaustion, not simple pressure, something bigger. And deep down, Jungkook already knew this concert was about to turn into a disaster. 20 minutes later, BTS gathered near the side entrance before opening VCR playback. The roar from the stadium shook the floor under their feet. Jin was stretching quietly. Hobie kept trying to lighten the mood by joking with the dancers. Taehyung was unusually silent while scrolling through something on his phone. RM stood near the production crew discussing timing changes with a serious expression. But Jungkook wasn't listening to any of it. He kept staring at Jimin. Jimin was smiling again now, too perfectly, too carefully, the kind of smile he used whenever he wanted nobody to ask questions. "You good?" Taehyung suddenly asked Jungkook quietly. Jungkook didn't look away from Jimin. "No." Taehyung followed his stare. His expression changed immediately. "Didn't tell you?" Jungkook, "Finally, tell me what?" Taehyung hesitated. That hesitation alone made Jungkook's stomach tighten. "Tell me what, Tae?" Before Taehyung could answer, RM clapped his hands once loudly. "Places everyone, 30 seconds. The members immediately moved toward the stage lift positions, but Jungkook grabbed Taehyung's wrist before he could leave. After the first set list, "We talk," Taehyung slowly nodded. And somehow that scared Jungkook even more. Seconds later, the lights inside the stadium exploded into darkness. The opening VCR began playing across the massive screens while the crowd screamed loud enough to shake the entire building. BTS rose slowly onto the stage platform under flashing lights and smoke effects, and instantly the energy changed. The performance began perfectly. Powerful choreography, massive fan chants, endless screams from every section of the stadium. From the outside, nobody would guess anything was wrong, but Jungkook noticed every little detail. Jimin missing half a breath during transitions, Jimin flexing his hand between dance positions, Jimin disappearing off stage faster than usual after songs ended. By the third song, Jungkook's jaw was clenched so tightly it hurt. Then came the first real warning sign. During a formation change, Jimin's step landed unevenly for half a second. Tiny mistake. Most fans never noticed, but Jungkook saw the pain flash across Jimin's face immediately before he forced another smile toward the cameras. That was it. Jungkook stopped focusing on the performance completely after that, and RM noticed. During a short transition blackout, RM leaned closer through their in-ear channel. "Jungkook, focus! He shouldn't be here. Not now, Young. We'll deal with it after the show." Jungkook's expression darkened instantly after the show, meaning RM already knew too. The realization hit him like ice water. They all knew, or at least some of them did. And nobody stopped this. The next stage began immediately before Jungkook could say another word. Bright lights flooded the arena again while the members spread across extended platforms to greet fans. Jimin kept smiling, waving, blowing kisses toward the audience like nothing was happening. But now Jungkook could see it clearly. Every movement was slower, careful, controlled. Like Jimin was calculating every single step just to stay standing. Rage slowly started building in Jungkook's chest. Not at Jimin, at everyone else, at the company, at the staff, pretending this was normal, at the members hiding it instead of stopping it. And maybe most of all, at himself for not noticing sooner. Then the moment happened. Small, quick, almost invisible. Jimin turned after greeting fans near the left side of the stage, and his knees nearly gave out for one terrifying second before he caught himself against a stage prop. The crowd thought it was part of the choreography. They screamed louder, but backstage monitors instantly exploded into panic. Staff members grabbed radios. One coordinator cursed under his breath. And Jungkook stopped walking completely in the middle of the stage. Jimin looked up fast, silently begging him not to react. "Don't do this here. Don't make this bigger." But Jungkook's expression had already changed. Cold, furious, dangerous. Taehyung noticed immediately from the opposite side of the stage. "Oh no," he whispered quietly into his mic. Because every BTS member knew one thing about Jungkook. He stayed quiet until he absolutely couldn't anymore. And once he reached that point, nobody could stop him. The song ended. Fireworks exploded across the stadium ceiling while the members moved quickly backstage for the next outfit change. The second they disappeared behind the curtains, Jungkook grabbed RM first. RM rubbed his forehead once. "Keep your voice down. Answer me. This isn't the place. Then where is the place? After he collapses?" Jin stepped between them immediately. "Jungkook, no." Jungkook pointed toward Jimin, who was sitting silently near the styling area, trying not to look at anyone. "How long has this been happening?" Nobody answered right away. That silence told him everything. Jungkook laughed once in disbelief. "Unbelievable." RM lowered his voice carefully. "The doctors cleared him for limited activity." "This is limited?" Jungkook snapped. "He can barely walk." Jimin finally stood up. "Stop yelling. Then tell them the truth." "I said I'm fine." "You're not fine." The entire backstage area went silent. Even the dancers stopped moving. Jimin stared at Jungkook with exhausted eyes. "You think I want this?" Jungkook froze. Jimin continued quietly. "You think I wanted tonight to happen like this?" His voice cracked slightly for the first time all night. This tour was already delayed twice. Everyone worked too hard for this concert. Fans waited months. "I can finish one show." Jungkook stepped closer instantly. "At what cost?" Jimin looked away without answering. And somehow that hurt Jungkook more than anything else. Because for the first time that night, Jimin looked genuinely scared. Not of the pain, not of the performance, but of disappointing everyone around him. RM finally spoke again. "We adjusted formations, shortened transitions. We're monitoring him closely." Jungkook stared at him in disbelief. "You planned around his injury instead of stopping him." "We didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice, not with this tour." Jungkook's face hardened completely. "Then maybe this tour shouldn't happen." The sentence hit everyone hard, especially Jimin. Before anyone could respond, the stage manager shouted again, 2 minutes to return. Staff immediately rushed back into motion, but the atmosphere had changed completely now. Heavy, sharp, dangerous. Jungkook looked at Jimin one last time before turning toward the stage entrance again. "If something happens to you out there..." He stopped himself halfway through the sentence, because he couldn't even finish the thought out loud. Jimin watched him silently, and for the first time all night, Jimin looked guilty. As if he already knew something Jungkook didn't. And that secret was about to change everything before the concert even reached halftime. The second half of the concert started with louder screams, brighter lights, and bigger energy from the crowd, but backstage the atmosphere inside BTS had completely fractured. Nobody said it directly, yet everyone could feel it. Jungkook was angry, not the normal kind of frustrated that disappeared after a performance mistake or stressful rehearsal. This was different. Cold anger, the kind that sat quietly inside him until it exploded at the worst possible moment, and RM knew it too. As the members prepared for the next stage transition near the hydraulic platform, RM pulled Jungkook aside before the cameras could catch them. "You need to calm down before we go back out there." Jungkook adjusted his in-ear monitor without even looking at him. "Tell him to stop performing. We're already halfway through the show." "Exactly, he's already pushed too far." RM lowered his voice further. The doctors said he could continue if his condition stayed stable. Jungkook finally looked at him. "Does he look stable to you?" RM didn't answer immediately. That hesitation was enough. Jungkook exhaled sharply and looked away toward the stage entrance where fans were chanting BTS's name loud enough to shake the walls again. Usually those chants gave him strength. Tonight they sounded like pressure closing in from every direction. Then Jimin appeared again after changing outfits, and the second Jungkook saw him, his frustration returned instantly. Jimin's makeup had been touched up perfectly. His hair was restyled. His smile was back again. But Jungkook noticed the tiny details nobody else would see, the stiffness in his shoulders, the slower breathing. The way he kept flexing one hand behind his back whenever nobody was looking. "You took painkillers again." Jungkook said it quietly, but Jimin froze anyway. "What? Don't lie to me." Jimin sighed tiredly. "We're about to go on stage. How many?" Jimin's jaw tightened. "Enough to finish the concert." Jungkook stared at him like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "That's not an answer, because you don't need one. I do if you're risking yourself like this." Jimin stepped closer suddenly, lowering his voice before staff nearby could hear. "You think I'm doing this because I want to?" Jungkook didn't respond. Jimin continued quietly. "Do you know what happens if I stop tonight? Nothing matters more than your health." Jimin laughed once under his breath. "Bitter, exhausted. That's easy for you to say." Jungkook's expression immediately changed. "What's that supposed to mean?" Jimin instantly regretted the sentence. It showed on his face immediately. But it was too late now. Jungkook took one slow step closer. "Say it." Jimin looked away first. "Forget it." Jungkook's voice dropped lower. "You don't get to say something like that and walk away." Before Jimin could answer, the countdown for the next stage began echoing through backstage speakers, 30 seconds to stage positions. The tension between them stayed hanging heavily in the air. Finally, Jimin spoke without looking at him. "You don't understand the pressure right now. Then explain it to me." Jimin stayed silent for a second too long, and suddenly Jungkook realized something terrifying. Jimin wasn't just hiding an injury. He was hiding something else too, something bigger. The stage lights flashed red across the entrance tunnel, the crowd erupted again, and before Jungkook could stop him, Jimin walked toward the stage first, leaving Jungkook standing there with growing dread in his chest. The next performance was intense from the start. Heavy choreography, fast transitions, explosive energy. Exactly the type of stage Jimin should never have been doing in his condition. Jungkook stayed near him during almost every formation change now, pretending it was part of the performance whenever he subtly adjusted positions to support him. Fans thought they were just interacting naturally on stage, but RM noticed immediately. So did Taehyung, so did Hobi. Jungkook was watching Jimin every second. Then came another dangerous moment. During a synchronized turn near the extended platform, Jimin lost timing for half a second again. His breathing visibly broke as he caught himself mid-movement. The crowd screamed louder, assuming it was emotional performance intensity. But Jungkook saw panic flash across Jimin's eyes this time. Real panic. Jimin knew he was reaching his limit. The song ended with fireworks exploding overhead. As the members spread out to greet fans again, Jungkook walked directly beside Jimin instead of separating to his assigned position. "You're done after this set." Jimin forced another smile toward cameras while whispering back through clenched teeth. "Stop controlling me. Then stop pretending you're okay. Not here." "Then when?" Jimin suddenly grabbed Jungkook's wrist briefly while still smiling toward fans. "Please." One word, quiet, desperate. It hit Jungkook harder than yelling ever could, because Jimin never asked for help like that, ever. But before Jungkook could respond, staff signaled them toward the next transition lift. The second they disappeared backstage again, Taehyung immediately approached Jungkook. "You need to slow down." He looked at him sharply. "You knew too." Taehyung rubbed the back of his neck uncomfortably. "Not everything. How long?" "A few weeks." Jungkook laughed in disbelief again. "Wow." "Listen, No, you listen. Jungkook lowered his voice dangerously. Everyone keeps saying there's more going on, so tell me. Taehyung glanced around carefully first. Not here. Then where? Taehyung hesitated again. After the concert, Jungkook stepped back immediately, furious. You sound exactly like RM because this isn't simple. Then make it simple. Taehyung looked toward Jimin across the room before speaking carefully. There are things happening with the company right now. Jungkook frowned instantly. What things? Negotiations. Contracts. Future schedules. Jungkook stared at him. What does that have to do with Jimin performing injured? Taehyung's silence answered him before words did. Jungkook's expression slowly darkened. No way, Taehyung didn't deny it, and suddenly everything started connecting together in Jungkook's mind. The pressure, the delayed tour, the constant meetings RM kept disappearing into, Jimin acting more exhausted every week, the members whispering behind closed doors lately whenever Jungkook walked in unexpectedly. Something big was happening behind the scenes of BTS in 2026, and Jimin was carrying the weight of it alone. Before Jungkook could press further, another staff member rushed over. 5 minutes until solo stages. Instantly, everyone separated toward different preparation rooms. Jungkook watched Jimin disappear again down another hallway surrounded by stylists and managers, and something inside him twisted painfully. He hated this feeling, being kept outside the truth. Especially by Jimin, because out of everyone in BTS, Jimin was usually the one who understood him without explanation. But lately, it felt like Jimin was building walls higher every single day. And Jungkook didn't know if he was trying to protect himself or push everyone away before something worse happened. 20 minutes later, the atmosphere inside the stadium shifted completely during the emotional solo stage section. Purple lights filled the arena while fans held up glowing army bombs like stars across the darkness. Jimin stepped onto the smaller center platform alone while soft music echoed through the speakers. The crowd screamed immediately, and despite everything happening backstage, the second Jimin smiled under those lights, the audience melted instantly. That was the terrifying thing about him. Even when he was hurting, he knew exactly how to hide it beautifully. Jungkook watched from backstage monitor screens with crossed arms and growing anxiety. Jimin's performance started smoothly at first. Soft vocals, controlled movements, emotional expression perfect for the cameras. But halfway through the stage, Jungkook noticed it again. The small signs returning, Jimin avoiding certain turns, holding tension in one side of his body, slight instability every time he shifted weight too quickly. Then suddenly, Jimin missed part of a step near the edge of the platform. Tiny mistake, barely visible, but enough for Jungkook's entire body to tense immediately. One of the backstage staff whispered nervously, "He's struggling more now." Jungkook turned sharply toward the managers nearby. "And you're still letting this continue?" Nobody answered him, because nobody had a good answer anymore. On the monitor, Jimin kept performing anyway, still smiling, still singing, still pretending everything was under control, while thousands of fans cried emotionally watching him under the lights. But backstage, the members were beginning to panic. Jin muttered quietly, "This is getting dangerous." Hobie nodded slowly. "He's pushing too hard now." RM stayed silent with his headset pressed tightly against one ear while production staff spoke rapidly around him. Jungkook suddenly noticed something else. Jimin's mic volume had been lowered slightly compared to earlier stages. Not enough for fans to notice, but enough to hide unstable breathing. Jungkook's eyes widened. "You adjusted his audio?" RM finally answered quietly. "Production decision." Jungkook looked genuinely shocked now. "You prepared for him to struggle." RM's exhausted expression said everything. This wasn't improvisation anymore. They expected problems tonight from the beginning. Jungkook stepped backwards slowly, furious disbelief written all over his face. "How bad is it really?" Nobody answered immediately, and that silence terrified him more than any explanation could have. Then on the screen, Jimin suddenly paused mid-stage for half a second longer than normal while breathing heavily into the microphone. The crowd thought it was emotional acting and screamed louder again, but backstage every BTS member went completely still because they all knew. Jimin was reaching the point where his body might stop cooperating entirely, and the concert still wasn't over yet. Jungkook couldn't breathe properly anymore. Every second watching Jimin struggle on the monitor felt worse than the last. The solo stage finally ended with roaring applause from the crowd, and the moment Jimin disappeared behind the curtains backstage, several staff members rushed toward him at once. Jungkook moved first, faster than everyone else. "Move!" His voice came out sharper than intended, forcing two managers aside immediately. Jimin was leaning against a black equipment case while trying to catch his breath discreetly before cameras backstage could pick him up. Makeup staff hovered nearby nervously with tissues and water bottles, but nobody looked comfortable anymore. Not even the stylists. Jimin closed his eyes briefly when he saw Jungkook approaching. "Don't what?" snapped quietly. Don't start another fight. Jungkook stared at him in disbelief. You think this is about fighting? Jimin rubbed his forehead once, exhausted. We still have almost an hour left. Exactly my point. No, you can't. Jungkook, stop saying my name like that. The sentence came out colder than either of them expected. Jimin's expression shifted immediately. Hurt flashed across his face for 1 second before disappearing again behind another practiced smile meant for nearby staff. But Jungkook saw it. Of course he saw it. He always saw it. Everybody out. Jungkook suddenly said it without taking his eyes off Jimin. The nearby staff froze awkwardly. Excuse me, one coordinator asked carefully. Jungkook finally looked at them directly. I said out. Arm appeared from the hallway immediately after hearing the tension rise. Jungkook pointed toward Jimin again. We're done pretending. RM lowered his voice. This isn't the place. Then tell me where the place is, because apparently nobody wants to tell me anything. The atmosphere backstage turned dangerously quiet again. Even passing dancers slowed down when they noticed the tension between BTS members. Jimin straightened slightly, trying to regain control of the situation. Please stop making this bigger than it is. Jungkook laughed once. Angry. Empty. Bigger? He stepped closer instantly. You almost collapsed out there. I recovered. That's not recovery. Jimin's expression hardened. You think I don't know my own limits? Jungkook answered immediately. Right now? No. I don't think you do. That sentence landed harder than shouting. Jimin stared at him silently for a second before looking away again, and Jungkook realized something painful. Jimin wasn't angry because Jungkook was wrong. He was angry because Jungkook was getting too close to the truth. RM finally stepped between them again. Enough, both of you. Jungkook immediately turned toward him. Then explain it. RM stayed quiet. Jungkook's patience finally cracked. What exactly is so important that he has to destroy himself for one concert? The silence that followed felt endless. Then finally RM answered quietly. Because if tonight fails, everything changes. Jungkook frowned immediately. What does that even mean? RM rubbed his eyes tiredly before speaking again. Investors are watching this tour carefully, so there are discussions happening behind the scenes right now about future promotions, international schedules, partnerships. Jungkook stared at him blankly. You're telling me he's risking himself because of business meetings? It's not that simple. Then explain it simply. RM hesitated. Big mistake. Because Jungkook noticed instantly. There's more. Nobody answered. Jungkook slowly turned back toward Jimin. What are you hiding from me? Jimin's breathing became uneven again. Not from physical exhaustion this time. From pressure. Emotional pressure. No. Tell me now. Jimin closed his eyes briefly before speaking quietly enough that only the members could hear. The company thinks I'm becoming a risk. The sentence changed everything. Jungkook froze completely. Even Jin looked stunned nearby. What? Jungkook whispered. Jimin forced a bitter smile. The injury delays, the schedule adjustments, the rumors online about my condition. He laughed softly without humor. They're worried I'll affect the tour long term. That's insane. Maybe. Jimin looked down briefly, but the numbers matter more right now. Jungkook couldn't believe what he was hearing, so they pressured you into performing anyway, RM answered carefully. Nobody forced him. Jimin immediately interrupted. Yes, they did. The entire room went silent. Jimin looked exhausted after finally saying it out loud. Maybe not directly, he continued quietly, but they made it clear what would happen if this tour kept getting delayed. Jungkook's chest tightened painfully. And you carried this alone? Jimin smiled weakly. What was I supposed to do? Tell everyone I couldn't handle it? Yes. That's easy for you to say. There it was again. That sentence. Jungkook's frustration returned instantly. Why do you keep saying that? Jimin finally looked directly at him. And for the first time all night, there was real emotion in his eyes. Raw emotion, because nobody questions you. Jungkook froze. Jimin continued quietly. Nobody looks at you and wonders if you're still worth the investment. Jimin, no, listen. His voice cracked slightly now. You're the golden one right now. Everyone knows it. The words hit Jungkook harder than expected. You really believe that? Jimin laughed softly again. Jungkook, look around. Nobody moved. Nobody denied it. And somehow that silence hurt even more, because deep down every member knew public attention around Jungkook in 2026 was massive. His solo success, global campaigns, endless headlines. The pressure inside BTS had shifted in ways none of them wanted to talk about openly, but now Jimin finally had. Jungkook shook his head immediately. You think I care about any of that? It doesn't matter if you care. Jimin's voice lowered further. Jungkook stepped closer again, eyes dark with emotion now instead of anger. So you decided to suffer through this alone instead of trusting me? Jimin looked away immediately, and that answer hurt more than words. Before anyone could continue, the stage manager suddenly appeared again looking panicked. We need final confirmation for the next set. RM immediately switched back into leader mode. Give us 30 seconds. The manager hesitated awkwardly before leaving again. Jungkook looked around at everyone, arm avoiding eye contact. Jin tense and silent, Taehyung staring at the floor. Hobie visibly anxious. They all knew. Maybe not every detail, but enough, and nobody stopped it. Jungkook's voice came out quieter now, more dangerous somehow. If he goes back out there and something happens, I answered carefully. The concert is almost over. That's not what I asked. RM didn't answer. Jungkook turned toward Jimin one last time. You really want to continue? Jimin nodded slowly. Yes, even now, especially now. Jungkook studied his face carefully. Exhaustion, fear, pressure, pride. All mixed together behind those tired eyes. Then suddenly, Jungkook understood the real problem. Jimin wasn't only afraid of disappointing the company. He was terrified of becoming a burden to BTS itself, and that realization broke something inside Jungkook instantly. Because after everything they survived together, Jimin still believed he had to earn his place by destroying himself quietly. Jungkook looked away sharply, jaw clenched hard again. Fine. The members looked surprised by how calm he suddenly sounded. Too calm. Jungkook? Jin started carefully, but Jungkook interrupted immediately. If nobody else is going to stop this, he looked back toward the glowing stage entrance while the crowd screamed outside again. Then I'll handle it myself. RM's expression changed instantly. What are you planning? Jungkook adjusted his microphone calmly. You'll see, and somehow that answer scared everyone more than his anger did. Minutes later, BTS returned to the stage for one of the biggest performance sections of the entire concert. Massive LED visuals exploded across the stadium while fans screamed louder than ever. But now the atmosphere between the members felt dangerously unstable underneath the performance smiles. Jungkook stayed close to Jimin constantly. Too close, changing formation slightly. Watching every movement, every breath, every step. Jimin noticed it immediately. Stop babysitting me, he whispered during one transition. Jungkook didn't even look at him. Then stop giving me reasons to. Jimin looked frustrated, but too exhausted to argue anymore. The next song began. Intense choreography again, heavy footwork, sharp synchronized movements. Jungkook could practically feel Jimin struggling beside him now. Then came the moment that changed everything. Halfway through the choreography break, Jimin's timing slipped badly for the first time all night. Not small this time, real, visible. His balance broke near the center platform, forcing him to stop moving for one terrifying second while the others continued formation around him. The crowd noise shifted instantly in confusion. Jimin recovered quickly, but Jungkook saw the pain flash across his face immediately after. And something inside Jungkook snapped completely. He stopped dancing, right there. In the middle of the performance, Arm's eyes widened instantly. Taehyung froze briefly. Jin looked genuinely alarmed, but Jungkook didn't care anymore. He turned directly toward Jimin under the massive stadium lights while 70,000 fans screamed around them, and for the first time that night, Jungkook stopped protecting the secret. The music was still blasting through Allegiant Stadium when Jungkook grabbed Jimin's wrist in front of everyone. The choreography around them continued for half a second before total confusion spread across the stage. RM missed his next movement completely. Hobie turned too late towards center formation. Taehyung's expression dropped instantly. Even the backup dancers hesitated because nobody understood what was happening anymore. But Jungkook didn't let go. The giant LED screens zoomed directly onto them by accident, showing 70,000 fans the exact moment Jungkook looked at Jimin with an expression nobody had ever seen from him on stage before. Not playful, not emotional fan service furious fear. Stop. Jungkook's microphone picked up the word louder than intended. The crowd immediately grew quieter in confusion. Jimin tried to pull his hand away subtly while still forcing a smile toward the audience. Jungkook. No, Jungkook stepped closer. You're done. The music continued awkwardly for several seconds while production staff backstage panicked through headsets. RM immediately moved toward them, still trying to maintain the performance naturally for cameras. Keep going, he muttered urgently through clenched teeth, but Jungkook ignored him completely. Jimin's eyes widened slightly. Don't do this here. Jungkook looked directly at him. Then where were you planning to collapse? Backstage? The sentence cut through the stadium noise like a blade. Fans closest to the stage started realizing something was seriously wrong now. The screaming slowly faded into nervous murmuring across sections of the crowd. Jimin lowered his voice desperately. But Jungkook shook his head immediately. I'm not helping you hide this anymore. Behind them, production finally cut the instrumental track suddenly, flooding the arena with awkward silence except for thousands of confused fans whispering at once. RM grabbed his mic instantly. Army, he shouted quickly, trying to regain control. The crowd responded automatically with loud cheers, but the energy felt unstable now. Everyone was watching Jimin and Jungkook. Jimin kept his head lowered briefly while trying to steady his breathing again. Jungkook still hadn't released his wrist, and the cameras were still rolling. Backstage managers were practically screaming through communication headsets now. Cut camera 3, switch angles, what's happening? But it was too late, the moment already happened. Fans saw everything. Jin stepped forward carefully, trying to ease the atmosphere. Everyone's a little tired tonight, he said with a forced laugh. Las Vegas energy is too strong. Some fans laughed nervously, others didn't, because Jimin still looked pale under the lights and Jungkook still looked seconds away from exploding. Taehyung moved closer too, trying to create distance between them without making it obvious. Let's greet Army and reset, he said softly. But Jungkook suddenly spoke into the mic again before anyone could redirect the situation. He shouldn't even be standing here right now. Complete silence. The members froze instantly. Arm closed his eyes briefly like his worst fear had just happened live in front of the entire world. Jimin looked genuinely panicked now. Jungkook, stop. But Jungkook's emotions had already gone too far. No, his voice shook slightly now, not from anger anymore, but from fear and frustration finally boiling over. Everybody backstage knew he was hurt. Everybody knew he shouldn't perform tonight. The audience gasped loudly across several sections. RM moved quickly toward Jungkook. Enough! But Jungkook stepped backward before RM could reach him. No, Young, I'm serious. He looked back toward Jimin again. He almost collapsed 3 times already. Jimin's breathing became uneven immediately. Not because of the injuries this time, because he was trapped in front of fans, in front of cameras, in front of the members. His biggest fear happening live. The exposure of weakness he tried so hard to hide. Please stop talking, Jimin whispered. Jungkook looked shattered hearing that. Why are you still protecting them? The sentence hit harder than anything else, because everyone knew exactly who he meant. The company, the management, the pressure behind the scenes. Rom spoke sharply this time. Jungkook. Leader voice, serious, warning him to stop before things became irreversible. But Jungkook finally turned toward him too. You knew. Brim stayed silent. All of you knew. Jin looked away. Hobie lowered his head. Taehyung's jaw tightened painfully. That silence confirmed everything publicly without anyone directly admitting it. Fans inside the stadium were fully confused now. Phones were recording everywhere. Social media clips were already exploding online in real time. Jimin suddenly pulled his wrist free and stepped backward hard enough that Jungkook immediately regretted everything. Because Jimin's expression wasn't anger anymore, it was humiliation, pure humiliation. Congratulations, Jimin said quietly into his mic. Now everybody knows. Junk froze. Jimin laughed softly, but it sounded broken. You wanted honesty, right? He looked around the stadium filled with worried fans staring back at him. There it is. RM immediately stepped closer. Jimin? But Jimin shook his head. No, it's fine. His smile returned again somehow, but now it looked completely empty. We should continue the concert. Jungkook stared at him in disbelief. Are you serious? The fans paid to see a show. I don't care about the show anymore. I do. The answer came instantly, too instantly. Like Jimin had trained himself to believe it no matter what. Jungkook's expression cracked completely at that point. Why? He whispered. Jimin looked directly at him under the lights. Because if I stop now, maybe they stop needing me too. The sentence destroyed the atmosphere instantly. Even the audience could feel the emotion behind it despite not fully understanding the context. Jungkook looked stunned, completely stunned. Jimin! But Jimin already turned away before he could continue. He walked toward the front edge of the stage slowly and bowed deeply toward the crowd while trying to regain control of the situation himself. Army, he said softly into the microphone. I'm sorry for worrying everyone. Fans immediately started shouting support from every section. We love you. Take care of yourself. It's okay. The support only made Jimin's eyes look more emotional. Jungkook stood frozen behind him while guilt crashed into him all at once. He wanted to protect Jimin, but instead, he exposed him in front of the world. Quickly stepped into recovery mode. We're going to take a short break before the next stage, he announced carefully. Please stay safe and keep cheering loudly for us. The members slowly started moving toward backstage again while production hurried to run emergency VCR footage across the screens. But the second they disappeared behind the curtains, the real explosion happened. What the hell was that? One manager shouted immediately. Jungkook turned instantly. Don't yell at him. You just caused a live broadcast disaster, maybe because you pushed him onto stage like nothing was wrong. RM stepped between them fast before things escalated further. Enough. The backstage hallway fell silent again. Jimin leaned weakly against the wall nearby, looking emotionally drained now more than physically exhausted. He wasn't even looking at Jungkook anymore. That hurt the most. Jungkook moved toward him carefully. Jimin! Don't! His voice was quiet, flat. I can't talk to you right now. Jungkook stopped immediately. Jimin kept staring at the floor. You promised me once, he continued softly, that no matter what happened we would protect each other first. Jungkook's chest tightened painfully because he remembered. Years ago. during another difficult time in BTS when pressure almost tore them apart. "I was trying to protect you," Jungkook whispered. Jimin finally looked up. His eyes were glassy under the harsh backstage lights. "Then why do I feel completely alone right now?" Jungkook couldn't answer. Because for the first time that night, he realized maybe he had made everything worse. And before he could figure out how to fix it, another terrifying problem suddenly appeared. One of the production staff rushed down the hallway holding a phone with panic written all over his face. "Young," arm turned immediately. "What?" The staff swallowed hard. The clips are everywhere online already. Everyone froze. The staff looked directly toward Jimin nervously. And people are starting to ask if this is the real reason contract discussions got delayed. The entire room went dead silent. Jungkook slowly turned toward RM. RM didn't say anything. He didn't need to, because in that moment Jungkook realized the truth was even bigger than he thought. And Jimin had been carrying all of it alone for far longer than anyone knew.
Nobody moved for several seconds after the staff member finished speaking. The only sound backstage was the muffled roar of fans outside waiting for BTS to return to the stage. Jimin stayed leaning against the wall with his head lowered, while RM rubbed his forehead slowly like the pressure inside the room had finally become impossible to control. Jungkook looked from one member to another, searching for somebody to deny what the staff had just said. Nobody did. "Contract discussions," Jungkook repeated quietly. RM finally exhaled. "Not now." "No." Jungkook's voice hardened again instantly. "Now." Jin looked uncomfortable immediately. Hobi avoided eye contact. Taehyung crossed his arms tightly while watching the hallway nervously to make sure no staff were listening too closely. But Jungkook didn't care anymore. Too many lies had already piled up tonight. "What discussions?" he asked again. RM stayed silent for another second before answering carefully. There were concerns after the second tour postponement earlier this year. Concerns from who? Executives, investors, international partners. Jungkook stared at him blankly. Because Jimin got injured. Because schedules became unstable, RM corrected quietly, and people behind the scenes started questioning whether the full tour could continue long-term. Jungkook laughed once in disbelief again. So instead of protecting him, everyone pushed him harder. It wasn't like that. This time the voice came from Jimin himself. Everyone looked toward him immediately. Jimin finally stood upright slowly despite the exhaustion written all over his face. "Nobody forced me into anything." Jungkook turned sharply. "You literally admitted they pressured you. Because I let them. That's not better." Jimin looked away briefly before speaking again. "You don't understand how these conversations work." Jungkook stepped closer instantly. "Then explain it." Jimin hesitated. That hesitation told Jungkook the truth before words even came. "They never directly said I'd become a problem," Jimin continued softly. "But every meeting started becoming about risk management, schedule protection, public confidence, tour reliability." His smile turned bitter again. "Funny words for asking if someone's still useful." The room fell quiet again. Jungkook's chest tightened painfully hearing it out loud, because now he understood why Jimin had been smiling so much lately. Why he kept practicing longer than everyone else. Why he stopped complaining about exhaustion months ago. Jimin wasn't trying to prove something to fans anymore. He was trying to prove he still deserved to stand beside BTS at all. "That's insane," Jungkook whispered. "Maybe." Jimin looked toward the stage entrance where purple lights flashed through the curtains. "But the rules changed." Jungkook frowned immediately. "What rules?" Jimin finally looked directly at him. "The rules where nobody can slow down anymore." Those words hit harder than yelling, because every member understood exactly what he meant. BTS in 2026 was bigger than ever globally. Bigger stages, bigger deals, bigger expectations, every move analyzed. Every delay turned into headlines. The pressure around the group had evolved into something colder and more corporate than before, and Jimin had clearly felt that shift the hardest. RM spoke quietly. "Tried to manage it privately." Jungkook immediately snapped back. "By letting him destroy himself." RM's expression hardened slightly now too. "You think I wanted this? Then why didn't you stop it?" RM didn't answer immediately. Big mistake again. Jungkook noticed every hesitation tonight now. "Because you were scared too," Jungkook said quietly. RM looked away, and that silence confirmed everything. BTS's leader was scared, not just for Jimin, for the future of the entire group. The realization made the atmosphere even heavier. Taehyung finally spoke carefully. "The company's been nervous ever since the international sponsors started asking questions." Jungkook turned toward him. "What questions?" Taehyung hesitated. "About stability." Jungkook laughed bitterly. Stability, he pointed toward Jimin. He's a human being, not a stock price. We know that, Hobi said quietly. Do they? Nobody answered him. Outside, the fans suddenly screamed louder again as old BTS footage began playing across the stadium screens during the unexpected break. But backstage, the group felt dangerously close to breaking apart emotionally for the first time in years. Jungkook looked back at Jimin. And you thought carrying all this alone was the answer? Jimin shrugged weakly. Someone had to. No. Jungkook's voice cracked slightly now. You should have trusted us. Jimin's eyes shifted briefly toward the other members before returning to Jungkook. Everybody already had enough pressure. That sentence hurt every member in the room because it sounded exactly like Jimin. Quietly sacrificing himself while pretending it was fine, Jin finally spoke softly. You should have told us how bad it got. Jimin smiled sadly. Would it have changed anything? Silence again. And that silence answered him, because deep down, maybe all of them knew the terrifying truth. BTS had reached a level where stopping completely no longer felt simple. Too many contracts, too many schedules, too many people depending on them continuing forward non-stop. The machine around them had become too big, and Jimin got trapped underneath it first. Another staff member suddenly approached carefully from the hallway. We need confirmation now. Fans are getting restless. RM nodded automatically, slipping back into leader mode again despite the tension crushing him too. 5 more minutes. The staff member left quickly. Jungkook stared at RM in disbelief. You're still planning to continue, RM answered quietly. We can't walk out on 70,000 people. Watch us. Jungkook. No. Jungkook looked around at everyone again. This is exactly the problem. He pointed toward the stage entrance. Everybody keeps acting like the concert matters more than the people standing here. Jimin suddenly interrupted softly. Sometimes it does. Jungkook turned immediately. Don't say that. Jimin laughed weakly. Why not? It's true. No, it's not. Then why does it feel like everything disappears the second someone can't keep up anymore? Jungkook froze, because that sentence wasn't really about tonight. It came from somewhere deeper. Months deeper, maybe years. Jimin continued quietly before anyone could respond. I saw the meetings, Jungkook. His eyes looked distant now. The conversations about future branding, solo positioning, public engagement numbers. He smiled bitterly again. Do you know how strange it feels hearing people discuss your future like they're analyzing business charts? Nobody interrupted him, not even RM, because this time Jimin needed to speak. At first I thought I was imagining it, Jimin continued. But then every conversation slowly became about efficiency, sustainability, which members were driving growth most strongly. Jungkook's expression darkened immediately. Stop. It's true. I said stop. Why? Jimin finally looked directly at him again. Because hearing it out loud makes you uncomfortable. Jungkook's jaw clenched hard. Because yes, it did. Especially because he knew exactly what Jimin meant. The industry attention around Jungkook lately had exploded beyond anything expected. Brands, interviews, solo campaigns, headlines constantly calling him the center of BTS's future. And now Jimin was standing here quietly admitting he felt replaceable beside that attention. The thought made Jungkook feel sick. You think I wanted any of that? Jungkook asked quietly. Jimin's expression softened slightly for the first time all night. No. Then stop acting like we're on different sides. Jimin looked down. Sometimes it already feels that way. The sentence hit Jungkook like a punch, because suddenly he realized how isolated Jimin truly became over the past year, smiling through pain, watching the industry shift around him, hearing executives discuss value and longevity while hiding physical exhaustion from everyone. No wonder he looked so tired lately. He wasn't just injured. He was emotionally drowning. Taehyung suddenly looked toward the hallway sharply. Someone's coming. Seconds later, 2 senior management staff entered backstage with tense expressions. The atmosphere changed instantly. Even RM straightened automatically. One of the executives spoke first. We need to resume the concert immediately. Jungkook's eyes narrowed. He's not going back out there. The executive looked surprised by how directly Jungkook answered. The situation is already unstable online. Ending the show early would create far worse speculation. Jungkook stared at him coldly. You're worried about speculation right now. We're worried about maintaining control of the situation. Jimin closed his eyes briefly hearing those words. Control. That was the real priority, not him, not the members, the narrative, the image, the business. Jungkook took one slow step forward. He can barely stand. Jungkook, RM warned quietly, but Jungkook ignored him completely. You knew he was hurt before tonight and still pushed this schedule. The executive answered carefully. Jimin personally insisted he could continue. Jungkook immediately looked back toward Jimin, because you made him feel like he had no choice. The room turned silent again. The executive's expression tightened slightly. That's an unfair interpretation. No. Jungkook's voice dropped lower now, dangerous again. What's unfair is making someone believe they become a liability the second they slow down. Even the staff nearby stopped moving entirely now. Nobody expected Jungkook to speak this openly. Especially not toward management directly. The executive adjusted his jacket calmly. Emotions are high right now, but we still have responsibilities to fulfill tonight. Jungkook almost laughed. Responsibilities. That word sounded disgusting now. Before he could answer again, Jimin suddenly stepped between them. I'll finish the concert. Jungkook looked genuinely shocked. What? Jimin avoided his eyes. We're already too deep into this situation. I don't care. I do. Jungkook grabbed his arm again instantly, softer this time, desperate instead of angry. Why are you still doing this to yourself? Jimin finally looked at him directly, and for one heartbreaking second, Jungkook saw the real answer hiding underneath everything else. Fear. Fear of losing his place. Fear of disappointing BTS. Fear that once people saw weakness, they'd never look at him the same way again. Jimin smiled faintly despite it all. Because I don't know who I am if I can't stand beside you anymore. And suddenly, Jungkook understood this wasn't just about one concert. This was about identity, loyalty, survival inside a world that never slowed down for anyone. And somehow, the worst part of the night still hadn't happened yet. Jungkook couldn't answer immediately after hearing Jimin's confession. The words stayed hanging between them like something fragile and dangerous at the same time. Because for years, BTS had been more than work to them, more than fame, more than schedules. It became identity, family, purpose. And now Jimin was standing there quietly admitting he was terrified that one injury could make him lose all of it. The realization hit every member hard. Jin looked away first. Hobi rubbed both hands over his face tiredly. Even Taehyung's usually unreadable expression cracked slightly. RM stayed silent, but his eyes looked exhausted in a way Jungkook hadn't seen in years. The executive cleared his throat awkwardly, trying to regain control of the situation. We don't have much time left. Jungkook immediately turned toward him. Then maybe you should leave. The atmosphere snapped tight instantly. Staff nearby froze again. Nobody talked to upper management like that directly. Especially not during a live stadium crisis. The executive's expression hardened slightly. Jungkook. No. Jungkook stepped forward without backing down. You already pushed him too far. RM moved quickly between them before things escalated completely. Enough. His voice carried real authority this time, not anger, desperation. Everybody calm down. But calm was impossible now. The truth had already come out. The cracks were visible everywhere. Jimin looked emotionally exhausted. Jungkook looked furious and heartbroken at the same time, and the rest of BTS looked trapped somewhere in the middle between protecting the group and protecting each other. Outside, the fans started chanting again loudly. BTS, BTS, BTS. The sound echoed through the backstage hallways like pressure building inside a sealed room. RM closed his eyes briefly after hearing it. We have to make a decision. Easy, Jungkook answered immediately. The concert ends now. Jimin shook his head before anyone else could respond. No. Jungkook stared at him. Why are you fighting me on this? Jimin's voice came out quieter now. Because you're only thinking emotionally. Jungkook laughed bitterly. Yeah, imagine caring emotionally when someone I love is hurting. The sentence slipped out before he could stop it. Silence. Immediate silence. Jimin froze completely. So did everyone else. Even the staff nearby pretended not to react while very obviously reacting internally. Jungkook realized what he said instantly, but it was too late now. Jimin looked at him carefully, emotions flickering across his face too quickly to fully hide. Jungkook looked away sharply. You know what I mean. But honestly, maybe he didn't anymore. The emotional tension between them had been building for months now, maybe longer. Too many late-night conversations. Too many moments where Jungkook noticed Jimin quietly sacrificing himself for everyone else. Too many times Jimin smiled while clearly struggling underneath. And now watching him destroy himself for a concert finally pushed something inside Jungkook past the breaking point. Taehyung suddenly interrupted the silence carefully. We should focus on the immediate problem first. Jin nodded quickly, grateful for the shift in conversation. Right, one thing at a time. But Jimin still hadn't looked away from Jungkook, and Jungkook could still feel it. That look. Soft confusion mixed with something deeper neither of them wanted to unpack right now. RM finally spoke again. Jimin slowly turned. Can you honestly finish the show safely? Everyone waited. Jimin hesitated just for a second, but that second told the truth louder than words ever could. RM noticed too. His shoulders dropped slightly with exhaustion. That's what I thought. The executive stepped forward immediately. If we stop now, media speculation will become uncontrollable. Jungkook turned instantly. I genuinely don't care anymore. You should. The executive's tone sharpened slightly now. This affects everyone. Jungkook's expression went cold again. No, what affects everyone is standing here pretending this is normal. Jimin suddenly interrupted before the argument exploded again. I can finish the final meant. Everybody looked toward him. Jimin swallowed slowly before continuing. No more choreography, no more heavy stages, just the closing section. RM looked uncertain. Jimin, please. That one word changed the atmosphere again. Jimin almost never asked directly for things like this. Let me finish properly, he said quietly. If the concert ends suddenly now, fans will panic more. Jungkook stepped closer immediately. You don't owe anybody an explanation. Jimin smiled sadly. Maybe not, but I owe them honesty. The sentence hurt because Jungkook knew exactly what Jimin meant. Tonight had already become public. Fans saw the tension, the fear, the cracks in BTS that nobody expected to witness live on stage. If they vanished suddenly now, the speculation online would explode even harder. RM looked torn apart internally. Leader responsibility pulling him one direction, concern for Jimin pulling the other. Finally he asked quietly, can you stand through the ending? Jimin nodded slowly. Yes. Jungkook immediately disagreed. No. Jimin looked back at him again. I can. You shouldn't have to. The room fell quiet once more. Then unexpectedly, Jin stepped forward. I'll stay beside him the entire time. Hobai nodded immediately after. Me too. Taehyung added quietly. Nobody leaves formation alone. RM looked around at the members, the unspoken agreement forming between them. Protective. Unified. Maybe for the first time tonight, they were finally acting like BTS again instead of separate people drowning in different pressures. Jungkook looked at Jimin carefully. And the second you feel worse. I know. Jungkook still didn't look convinced, not even close, but eventually he stepped back slightly anyway. Fine. The executive immediately relaxed. Good, then let's resume quickly before. I wasn't talking to you, Jungkook interrupted coldly. The executive went silent again. RM quickly stepped in before another confrontation started. Everybody reset, we finish this together. The members slowly started preparing again while staff scrambled to reorganize the stage schedule for a shortened ending section. But even as the room moved again, the emotional tension stayed hanging heavily between Jungkook and Jimin, especially after Jungkook's accidental confession moments earlier. Jimin approached him quietly while the others were distracted. Did you mean it? Jungkook looked up immediately. What? Jimin held his gaze carefully. What you said. Jungkook's chest tightened instantly. He knew exactly which part Jimin meant, but answering honestly right now felt terrifying. This isn't the time. Jimin gave a faint smile. You always say that. Jungkook frowned slightly. Say what? That there'll be another time later. Jimin's expression softened sadly. But lately there never is. The words hit hard because they were true. Over the past year, BTS schedules became overwhelming again. Different flights, different projects, endless obligations. Jungkook and Jimin still stayed close, but conversations became shorter. Feelings became hidden underneath jokes and quick glances and unfinished sentences. And now suddenly everything unspoken between them was surfacing during the worst night possible. Jungkook lowered his voice carefully. You really want to do this conversation now? Jimin looked down briefly. No. Then he looked back up. But I think tonight proved we keep running out of later. Before Jungkook could answer, RM called everyone towards stage positions again. 2 minutes. Jimin nodded once and turned away before the conversation could continue, leaving Jungkook standing there with his heart pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with anger anymore. Minutes later, BTS returned to the stage under softer lighting and emotional background music instead of explosive choreography. The crowd screamed loudly again, but the energy had changed completely. Fans could tell something serious happened now. The members walked closer together than usual, instinctively protective around Jimin without making it too obvious. RM started speaking first. "Army," his voice sounded steadier now, but emotional underneath. "Thank you for waiting for us." Loud cheers answered immediately. Jimin stood quietly beside Jungkook while waving softly toward different sections of the stadium. Jungkook stayed close enough that their shoulders brushed occasionally. Neither moved away. Jin started joking lightly with fans to ease tension. Hobi forced brighter energy into the atmosphere. Taehyung smiled gently while interacting with the audience. But underneath it all, everyone still felt shaken. Then unexpectedly, fans began chanting Jimin's name loudly. "Jimin! Jimin!" "Jimin!" The sound filled the entire stadium. Jimin froze slightly. His eyes widened as thousands of fans continued cheering support toward him specifically now. Some fans were crying openly near barricades. Others held handmade signs that read "Take care of yourself and we love you no matter what." Jungkook watched Jimin's expression carefully as the realization hit him. The fans weren't angry. They weren't disappointed. They were worried, supportive, loving. Jimin's lips parted slightly like he didn't know how to process it. RM handed him the microphone gently. "Say something." Jimin stared out at the crowd for several quiet seconds before finally speaking. "I'm sorry." The fans immediately shouted back louder. "No, don't apologize." Jimin laughed softly through visible emotion. "You guys really..." He stopped briefly to steady himself. "You always make things harder." Some fans laughed emotionally through tears. Jimin smiled faintly again, real this time. "Small but real. I thought if I kept smiling," he admitted quietly, "then nobody would worry." The stadium became completely silent listening to him. Jungkook looked at Jimin carefully, noticing the honesty finally breaking through after months of hiding. Jimin looked down briefly before continuing. "But maybe I forgot something important." He glanced sideways toward the members standing around him, then toward Jungkook specifically. "I'm not supposed to carry everything alone." The sentence hit every member hard instantly, especially Jungkook, because finally, Jimin was admitting it out loud. But before the emotional moment could fully settle, something unexpected happened backstage that nobody on stage knew about yet. One of the company staff suddenly rushed toward RM's manager near the side entrance with panic written all over his face, while holding up a phone screen filled with rapidly exploding headlines online. And the second RM's manager saw those headlines, his entire expression changed. Because the situation outside, the stadium had already started spiraling far beyond their control. Backstage, the atmosphere shifted from tense to outright panic within minutes. Staff members clustered around glowing phone screens while managers whispered urgently into headsets. Clips from the concert were spreading everywhere online faster than anyone could control. Jungkook grabbing Jimin's wrist. The sudden silence on stage. Jimin admitting he was struggling. Fans crying in the audience. Every angle was already exploding across social media worldwide. And worse than that, people were starting to connect the situation to rumors that had been quietly circulating around BTS for months. "This is bad," one coordinator muttered under his breath. "International media picked it up already." RM's manager rubbed both hands over his face. "We need statements prepared immediately." "From the company?" another staff member asked nervously. The manager hesitated. "No official statements yet." "Why not?" "Because executives are still discussing damage control." Damage control. The phrase sounded cold even backstage. Meanwhile on stage, BTS continued the emotional closing ment section without realizing how quickly the situation outside the stadium was escalating. Fans were still cheering loudly, but now there was an emotional heaviness hanging over the arena that none of their previous concerts had ever carried before. Jimin stood quietly beside Jungkook, while RM spoke to the audience about gratitude and perseverance. Usually these ending speeches felt warm and celebratory. Tonight they felt fragile. Every member looked emotionally exhausted. Jungkook kept glancing sideways at Jimin every few seconds, still terrified he might suddenly lose balance again. Jimin noticed eventually and smiled faintly. "I'm okay right now," Jungkook answered without hesitation. "I still don't believe you." Jimin almost laughed at that. Almost. But before he could answer again, Taehyung suddenly leaned closer through his microphone with a playful expression clearly meant to break the tension. "Jungkook Hyung has been staring at Jimin Hyung like a security guard all night." The crowd laughed loudly. Jungkook rolled his eyes immediately. "Because somebody has to." Fans screamed louder at the interaction, grateful for even a small return of BTS's normal chemistry after the emotional chaos earlier. Jimin looked down briefly, smiling softer this time. "You're overreacting." Jungkook looked directly at him while still holding his mic. "No, I started reacting too late." The audience screamed again instantly at the emotional tone behind the sentence, but Jimin's expression changed completely, because he understood what Jungkook actually meant underneath those words: regret, guilt, fear. RM quickly stepped in before the atmosphere became too emotional again. "Army," he said warmly, "please promise us something tonight." The crowd responded immediately. "Yes," RM smiled faintly. "Take care of yourselves too." Loud cheers filled the stadium again. But while fans focused on the stage, backstage staff were now dealing with an entirely different nightmare. One of the executives stormed through the production hallway looking furious while talking rapidly on the phone. "No, we cannot confirm anything right now," he snapped quietly. "Especially not during the concert." Another manager approached carefully. "The keywords are trending globally already." "I know." "And some reporters are asking whether contract renewals are connected to health concerns." The executive stopped walking immediately. His expression darkened. "Who leaked that?" Nobody answered, because honestly nobody knew anymore. Once the live clips spread online, fans and media started connecting old rumors instantly. Delayed schedules, canceled appearances earlier in the year, strange tension during interviews recently. Everything was resurfacing now all at once. The company was losing control of the narrative by the minute. Back on stage, BTS prepared for the final ending song of the night. A softer emotional track instead of another intense performance. The members spread across the stage while fans raised purple lights throughout the stadium like a glowing ocean under the dark Las Vegas sky. Jimin stood near the center platform, quietly listening to the crowd sing along before Jungkook approached him again. This time more carefully. Less angry. More honest. "You scared me tonight." Jimin looked at him softly. "I know." "No," Jungkook shook his head. "I don't think you do." The music played gently around them while fans screamed in the background, but somehow the moment between them still felt private. "When I saw you almost fall earlier," Jungkook stopped briefly, struggling to say the rest. "I thought maybe I was too late." Jimin's expression softened completely now. No walls, no fake smile, just exhaustion and emotion. "You weren't too late." Jungkook laughed quietly without humor. "Feels like I was." Jimin looked down briefly before answering. "I didn't want you to see me like this." "Why?" "Because you look at me differently when you worry." Jungkook frowned slightly. "How?" Jimin hesitated, then finally answered honestly. "Like I'm fragile." The word hurt Jungkook instantly. "You think I see you that way?" Jimin smiled faintly. "Sometimes." Jungkook stepped closer without thinking. "Jimin." His voice lowered completely now, serious, emotional. "You're the strongest person I know." Jimin looked genuinely surprised hearing that. Jungkook continued before fear could stop him. "Do you know how exhausting it is watching you carry everybody else's emotions all the time?" Jimin blinked slowly. Jungkook shook his head softly. "You protect everyone until there's nothing left for yourself." The words landed directly in Jimin's chest, because nobody said things like this to him openly, especially not lately. Jimin looked away quickly before the emotion in his eyes became too obvious on camera. "You're saying dangerous things on stage tonight." Jungkook smiled faintly for the first time in hours. "Maybe I'm tired of pretending too." The crowd screamed loudly nearby as Jin and Hobi started interacting with fans at the extended stage, but Jimin and Jungkook barely noticed anymore. The emotional distance between them that had been building for months suddenly felt painfully thin now. Like one honest conversation could finally destroy it completely. Then suddenly Jimin swayed slightly, tiny movement, but Jungkook caught it instantly. His entire expression changed back to concern immediately. "Sit down." "I'm fine." "Jimin," I said, his sentence cut off briefly as he steadied himself again. Jungkook grabbed his arm carefully before cameras could fully catch the moment. "Enough." Jimin exhaled slowly, finally too tired to argue anymore. Jungkook guided him toward one of the stage risers near the back, while the other members subtly adjusted positions to block camera focus naturally. BTS instincts. Protect first. Always. Fans noticed anyway. The cheering softened into worried murmurs again. RM quickly addressed the audience while walking closer. "Everyone's okay," he reassured gently. "Long night." The crowd responded supportively, but anxiety still lingered everywhere now. Jimin sat carefully while catching his breath. Jungkook crouched briefly beside him, ignoring cameras entirely at this point. "Tell me the truth," he whispered. "How bad is it right now?" Jimin looked exhausted, completely exhausted. "I don't know anymore." That answer terrified Jungkook more than anything else tonight, because Jimin always knew how to push through, always knew how to survive difficult performances. Hearing uncertainty from him now meant the situation was far worse than anyone admitted earlier. Jungkook lowered his voice further. "We're ending this the second the song finishes." Jimin didn't argue this time. He simply nodded weakly, and that scared Jungkook even more, because surrender wasn't normal for Jimin either. Meanwhile, backstage, another crisis was beginning to unfold. One of the company PR staff rushed toward the executives with visible panic. "We have another problem." The executive looked exhausted already. "What now?" The staff member swallowed hard. "Some fans outside the stadium are live-streaming discussions about possible member separation rumors." The executive froze instantly. "What? People think tonight exposed deeper issues inside the group." Silence. Heavy silence. Because honestly, they weren't entirely wrong. The emotional fractures inside BTS tonight were real. Pressure, fear, miscommunication, loneliness, all hidden underneath polished performances for months, and now millions of people online were watching those cracks appear in real time. Back on stage, the final chorus began while confetti slowly started falling across the stadium. Fans sang loudly through tears while BTS stood together near center stage under purple lights. From the outside, it almost looked beautiful again, but up close, every member looked emotionally shattered. Jungkook stayed beside Jimin the entire time now, one hand hovering near him constantly without even realizing it. Jimin noticed eventually and smiled faintly again. "You really aren't leaving my side anymore, huh?" Jungkook answered quietly. "Not after tonight." Jimin's expression changed slightly at that answer, softer, more vulnerable, like he wanted to say something important back. But before he could, RM suddenly received an urgent message through his in-ear monitor. His face changed instantly. Jungkook noticed immediately. "What happened?" RM looked toward the side stage entrance where multiple staff members now stood waiting nervously. Then he looked back at the members with visible concern. "We may have to leave immediately after the ending." Jin frowned. "Why?" RM hesitated. That hesitation made everyone tense instantly again. Then quietly, carefully, RM answered. "Because reporters already found the hotel." The entire group went silent, and for the first time that night, even Jimin looked genuinely afraid. The final note of the ending song echoed through Allegiant Stadium, while purple confetti drifted slowly through the air like falling sparks. Fans were still singing along emotionally, but BTS's attention had completely shifted backstage now. Reporters finding the hotel, this quickly meant the situation outside had exploded far beyond normal concert controversy. RM's expression stayed tense as more instructions came rapidly through his in-ear monitor. "Security wants immediate exit movement," he muttered quietly to the members. Jin frowned. "Already?" RM nodded once. "The crowd outside is growing fast." Jungkook immediately looked toward Jimin. Jimin still looked exhausted sitting near the backstage riser while trying to keep his breathing controlled. The emotional weight of the night had finally caught up to him completely now, and somehow, seeing reporters waiting outside made everything worse. Because it meant the private fears he spent months hiding were no longer private at all. The audience kept cheering loudly for an encore, unaware of the full panic happening behind the scenes. Usually BTS stayed longer after concerts. More talking, more fan interaction, more emotional goodbyes. Tonight, management wanted them out immediately before the media frenzy escalated further. RM forced a smile toward the crowd while lifting his mic. "Army!" The cheers grew louder instantly. "Thank you for staying with us tonight." Fans screamed emotional responses back. "We love you! Take care of yourselves!" Jungkook glanced sideways at Jimin again during the chaos. Jimin looked overwhelmed now, not physically this time, emotionally. Hearing thousands of fans shouting support after he spent months believing weakness would disappoint everyone clearly shattered something inside him. Taehyung leaned closer quietly. "You okay?" Jimin nodded automatically, too automatically. Taehyung noticed immediately but didn't push further, because honestly, none of them knew how to process tonight anymore. The members gathered together near center stage for the final group bow. Cameras zoomed in while the crowd screamed louder than ever. BTS stood hand in hand under the stadium lights, but the energy between them felt completely different now. Raw, fragile, real in a way fans almost never got to see publicly. Jungkook squeezed Jimin's hand slightly during the bow without thinking. Jimin looked sideways at him in surprise for half a second before looking back down again. That tiny moment alone immediately sent another wave of screaming through the audience. Fans noticed everything tonight, every glance, every emotion, every shift between the members. RM straightened slowly after the bow. "Please get home safely," he told the audience warmly. "And don't worry too much about us." The crowd reacted emotionally again, but Jungkook noticed something painful instantly. Jimin lowered his eyes after hearing that sentence, because tonight proved fans already were worried, deeply worried, and maybe for the first time Jimin couldn't pretend otherwise anymore. As the members waved goodbye and started walking toward backstage exits, the emotional atmosphere inside the stadium remained strangely quiet compared to normal BTS concerts. Fans weren't just excited anymore. They were concerned, protective, confused about what exactly they witnessed tonight. The second BTS disappeared behind the curtains, security teams immediately surrounded them. Managers moved quickly through the hallway giving rapid instructions. "Vehicles are ready. Use the lower garage exit. No stopping outside." The pressure backstage became suffocating instantly. Jimin slowed down slightly near the hallway wall while rubbing his eyes tiredly. Jungkook noticed immediately and stopped beside him. "Can you walk?" Jimin looked almost offended despite his exhaustion. "Seriously?" "Answer the question." Jimin sighed softly. "Yes." But when he took another step, his balance shifted again briefly. Jungkook caught his arm instantly before anyone else could react. Their eyes locked for a second, neither spoke. They didn't need to. The fear in Jungkook's expression said enough. RM noticed too. "Bring a chair," he ordered quietly toward nearby staff. "I don't need a chair," Jimin protested immediately. "You can barely stand." "I'm fine." Jungkook finally snapped again. "Stop saying that." The hallway went silent immediately. Jimin looked hurt by the sudden outburst, but Jungkook looked worse, exhausted, scared, emotionally wrecked. "Every time you say you're fine tonight," Jungkook continued quietly, "something worse happens 5 minutes later." Jimin looked away without answering. That silence confirmed everything again. Jin stepped closer gently. "Sit for a minute, Jimin. This time Jimin didn't argue. That scared everyone most of all. Because stubbornness disappearing meant his energy was finally gone completely. Staff quickly brought a folding chair while security continued coordinating the emergency exit plan nearby. Jungkook stayed beside Jimin the entire time, close enough that their knees almost touched while the chaos moved around them. For a few seconds neither spoke. Then quietly Jimin asked, "Are you angry at me?" Jungkook looked stunned by the question. "What?" Jimin stared down at his hands. "For hiding everything." Jungkook's expression softened immediately. "I'm angry you felt like you had to." Jimin swallowed slowly. "That's not the same thing." Jungkook exhaled heavily before answering honestly. "Maybe part of me is angry." Jimin nodded faintly like he expected that answer. But Jungkook continued before the silence could settle wrong between them again. "Mostly I'm angry at myself." Jimin looked up. Jungkook laughed quietly without humor. "How did I not notice how bad things got?" Jimin's eyes softened immediately. "You had your own pressure. That's not an excuse. It's reality." Jungkook shook his head firmly. "No, reality is I should have been there sooner." The sentence landed heavily between them, because both of them knew this wasn't just about injuries or concerts anymore. It was about emotional distance slowly growing without either of them admitting it until tonight forced everything open. Jimin looked at him carefully for several quiet seconds before speaking again. "You know what scared me most?" Jungkook frowned slightly. "What?" Jimin's voice dropped almost to a whisper. "Not the injury," he smiled sadly. "Not even the company conversations." Jungkook stayed silent, waiting. Jimin looked down again briefly before continuing. "I was scared you looked disappointed in me." Jungkook's face changed instantly, completely shattered. "Jimin, I know it sounds stupid." "No," Jungkook moved closer without thinking. "Don't say that." Jimin's eyes looked glassy again under the harsh backstage lights. Everyone kept talking about how important this tour was, how much pressure there was. And all I could think was, he stopped briefly, "What if I become the reason things start falling apart?" Jungkook immediately answered, "You would never be that reason." Jimin smiled weakly. "You say that now." Jungkook grabbed his hand before he could stop himself, firm, immediate. "I'd say it any time." Jimin froze completely at the contact. So did Jungkook honestly. because despite years of closeness, neither of them usually crossed emotional lines this openly in front of others. But tonight every wall between them felt unstable already. Jin quietly looked away to give them privacy. Taehyung noticed too and subtly distracted nearby staff by asking questions about the exit route. Even RM pretended not to notice for a moment. Jungkook lowered his voice carefully. "You're not replaceable." Jimin's breathing caught slightly. Jungkook squeezed his hand once more. "Not to BTS." Then quieter, more personal. "And definitely not to me." The words settled heavily between them. Dangerous. Honest. Jimin looked directly into Jungkook's eyes for several long seconds without speaking. The emotional tension felt almost unbearable now. Months of hidden feelings and fear suddenly sitting right there between them under ugly backstage fluorescent lights after the worst concert night of their lives. Then suddenly security rushed back down the hallway. "We need to move now." The moment broke instantly. Jimin slowly pulled his hand away first. Jungkook immediately hated the empty feeling that followed. RM stood quickly. "What happened?" The security leader looked serious. "Fans found the garage entrance too." Everyone froze. "How?" one manager asked sharply. "Live streams." The security leader looked frustrated. "People tracked vehicle movement from staff exits." The atmosphere immediately turned chaotic again. Staff began speaking rapidly into radios while security reorganized routes. Jungkook stood protectively near Jimin instinctively as tension spread through the hallway. Then another staff member rushed over holding a phone. "Taehyung," RM turned. "What now?" The staff member looked genuinely nervous. "A major entertainment reporter just posted that insiders are questioning whether BTS can continue the world tour safely." Silence. Complete silence. Jimin's expression dropped instantly hearing those words. There it was, his biggest fear, public now. Not hidden in private meetings anymore, not whispered quietly backstage. The question was officially out there for the entire world to discuss. Can BTS continue like this? Jungkook saw the exact moment panic hit Jimin internally. His breathing changed again, his shoulders tensed hard, and suddenly Jungkook realized something terrifying. The physical injury was no longer the biggest danger tonight. It was the emotional damage, the guilt, the pressure. The fear that he had already become a burden to the group he loved most. And as security hurried BTS toward the emergency exit tunnels beneath the stadium, Jungkook made a silent decision walking beside Jimin through the flashing hallway lights. No matter what happened next, he wasn't letting Jimin face any of it alone again. The underground service tunnel beneath Allegiant Stadium felt colder than the backstage hallways above. Security teams moved quickly around BTS, while black SUVs waited near the private loading exit with engines already running. Staff members were speaking urgently into radios, trying to coordinate alternate routes away from the growing crowd outside. But inside the middle vehicle, nobody was speaking at all. The silence between the members felt heavy after everything that happened on stage. Jimin sat near the window with his head resting back against the seat, eyes closed from exhaustion. Jungkook sat directly beside him, close enough to notice every uneven breath, every slight tension in his posture whenever the car hit bumps leaving the stadium garage. Across from them, RM kept checking his phone nonstop, while Jin quietly stared down at his hands. Taehyung watched the city lights outside with an unreadable expression. Hobai looked emotionally drained. None of them looked like people who had just finished one of the biggest concerts of their careers. They looked like survivors after something broke open publicly that could never be hidden again. The vehicle finally pulled onto the Las Vegas Strip, surrounded by escort security. Bright neon lights flashed across the windows, while fans crowded sidewalks outside, still wearing BTS merchandise and waving purple lights in the night. Some recognized the motorcade instantly and started screaming. Others were already live-streaming. Jungkook glanced toward Jimin again. "You okay?" Jimin kept his eyes closed. "Tired." Jungkook frowned slightly. "That's not an answer." Jimin finally opened his eyes slowly and looked at him. "You ask that every 5 minutes now, because I don't trust you anymore when you say you're fine." Jimin almost smiled at that, almost, but the exhaustion behind his expression remained too heavy. RM suddenly spoke without looking up from his phone. "It's getting worse online." Nobody asked what he meant, they already knew. "How bad?" Jin finally asked quietly. RM hesitated before answering. "The clips from stage are everywhere globally now." Taehyung rubbed his forehead slowly. "Fans are worried." RM gave a short, humorless laugh. "Fans are panicking." The vehicle fell silent again. Jimin looked back toward the window immediately after hearing that. Jungkook noticed his fingers tightening slightly against the edge of the seat. Guilt again. Always guilt. "Stop reading things," Jungkook muttered toward RM. RM finally looked up tiredly. "I don't have that option tonight." He held up his phone slightly. "Media outlets are already asking if the tour's being suspended." Jimin's head turned immediately. "What?" RM sighed. "Nobody knows anything yet, but they're talking about it." "Yes." Jimin looked away again instantly, jaw tightening hard. Jungkook noticed immediately. "Don't." Jimin answered quietly without turning back. "Don't what?" "Start blaming yourself again." Jimin didn't answer, because honestly, he already was. The convoy finally arrived at the hotel through a secured underground entrance where even more security staff waited nervously. The second the doors opened, the noise from outside hit them immediately. Fans and reporters had already crowded multiple street entrances surrounding the building. Camera flashes exploded constantly somewhere above street level. "Move quickly," security instructed. BTS stepped out surrounded tightly by staff while rushing through the private elevator access hallway. Jimin slowed briefly once again halfway toward the elevators. Jungkook immediately noticed. "Hey!" Jimin shook his head softly. "Just dizzy." RM turned sharply. "We need medical staff upstairs now." "No doctors," Jimin said immediately. Too fast, too defensive. The members exchanged looks instantly. Jungkook frowned. "Why not?" "Because I'm tired." "That's exactly why." Jimin looked genuinely frustrated now. "I don't want more people involved tonight." The elevator doors opened before the conversation could continue. Everyone quickly moved inside while security blocked access behind them. The moment the doors closed, the atmosphere shifted again. Smaller, more trapped somehow. Jimin leaned against the wall quietly while the elevator climbed toward the private floors reserved for BTS staff. Jungkook kept watching him carefully until finally Taehyung spoke. "You're starring again." Jungkook didn't even deny it. "Good." Taehyung sighed softly. "You're impossible tonight." Jungkook answered quietly. "Maybe I should have been impossible sooner." Jimin lowered his eyes after hearing that. The elevator finally opened onto the private hotel floor where managers and additional staff were already waiting anxiously. The second BTS stepped out, conversations immediately stopped. Everyone could feel how unstable the situation had become. RM rubbed his face tiredly. "Meeting room, now," nobody argued. The members slowly followed him toward the private suite lounge while staff members whispered nervously nearby. Jimin lagged slightly behind the group. Jungkook slowed automatically to match his pace. "You should rest." Jimin smiled faintly. "And you should stop hovering." "Not happening." Jimin glanced sideways at him. "You're really serious about that?" Jungkook answered immediately. "Yes." Jimin looked away quickly before Jungkook could fully read his expression. The private suite meeting room felt suffocating once everyone gathered inside. Laptops open. Phones ringing non-stop. Managers packing nervously near the walls. It looked less like a concert after-party and more like a crisis headquarters. RM stood near the center table listening to updates from PR staff while the other members slowly settled around the room. Jungkook stayed near Jimin instinctively again. Then one of the PR managers finally spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. "We have a major problem." Nobody reacted outwardly because honestly, that sentence described the entire night already. The manager continued. "A source leaked internal discussion details to reporters." RM's expression darkened instantly. "What details?" The manager swallowed hard. "Questions about restructuring future tour schedules around member health stability." Silence. Immediate silence. Jin frowned deeply. "Restructuring?" The manager looked uncomfortable. "Some outlets are interpreting it as possible long-term lineup concerns." Jungkook stood up so fast his chair scraped sharply against the floor. "What?" Jimin froze completely beside him. The manager hurried to clarify. "Nothing official exists, but the wording being used online is getting dangerous." RM stepped forward immediately. "Show me." The manager handed him a tablet displaying rapidly spreading headlines. Jungkook moved closer too. And the second he saw the articles, rage flooded through him instantly. International reporters question BTS tour future after live stage incident. Insiders claim company DISUSSING performance ADJUSTMNTS. Concerns grow over group stability following JIMIN health scare. Jungkook looked ready to throw the tablet across the room. "This is insane." But Jimin wasn't speaking at all anymore. He was staring at the screen completely motionless. Jungkook noticed instantly. Jimin! No response. RM lowered the tablet carefully. None of this is confirmed. Jimin laughed once quietly. Empty. Doesn't matter now. It does matter. No. Jimin stood slowly from the couch. The conversation already started publicly. Jungkook grabbed his arm gently. Hey! Jimin looked at him finally, and Jungkook's chest tightened immediately at what he saw there. Fear. Real fear. This is exactly what I was trying to avoid, Jimin whispered. Nobody knew how to answer that, because he was right. Tonight confirmed every insecurity he'd been silently carrying for months. The idea that one injury could suddenly turn him from irreplaceable member into risk factor in industry conversations. Jungkook shook his head immediately. None of this changes who you are. Jimin smiled sadly again. That's not how the industry works. Then the industry's wrong. Jimin looked exhausted hearing that. You still think this is simple? No. Jungkook stepped closer. I think they're making you feel disposable when you're not. Jimin looked away instantly. And that silence hurt worse than arguments now, because part of him clearly believed it already. RM suddenly interrupted sharply after reading another update on his phone. Everybody stay off social media completely. Taehyung frowned. That bad? RM looked up slowly. Someone started a rumor that tonight was the reason contract renewals stalled earlier this year. The room went dead silent again. Jungkook slowly turned toward RM. What does that mean? RM hesitated. Big mistake. Jungkook noticed immediately. Taehyung, RM exhaled heavily. There were discussions months ago about adjusting group schedules temporarily until Jimin recovered fully. Jin looked confused. You never told us that. RM looked exhausted. Because nothing was finalized. Jungkook's expression hardened. Adjusting schedules how? RM didn't answer immediately. Jimin suddenly did instead, quietly, painfully calm. They discussed continuing some parts of the tour without me. Silence crashed across the room like a physical impact. Jungkook felt his entire body go cold instantly. What? Jimin kept staring at the floor. Just discussions. No. Jungkook shook his head sharply. No way. RM stepped forward quickly. It never moved forward. But it happened, Jimin whispered. Nobody denied it, because they couldn't. And suddenly everything finally made horrifying sense to Jungkook. Why Jimin trained harder while injured. Why he kept forcing smiles through exhaustion. Why he looked terrified of slowing down for even one concert. He wasn't just scared of disappointing people. He was scared BTS might continue moving without him. Jungkook looked shattered by the realization. You carried that alone, Jimin laughed softly again. What was I supposed to say? Jungkook stared at him in disbelief. Anything. Jimin finally looked up, eyes glassy now. Would it have changed the conversations happening behind my back? Nobody answered, because maybe not. And that truth was unbearable. Jungkook stepped back slowly like the room suddenly became too small to breathe inside. The pressure, the company, the rumors, the fear inside Jimin for months while everyone kept performing normally on stage pretending nothing was wrong. Jungkook felt sick realizing how blind he'd been. Then suddenly Jimin swayed hard beside the couch. The members reacted instantly. Jungkook caught him before he could fully lose balance. Jimin! Panic exploded through the room immediately. Staff rushed forward. RM shouted for medical assistance. But Jimin grabbed Jungkook's sleeve weakly before anyone else reached him. And in a voice barely above a whisper, he said something that made Jungkook's entire expression change instantly. Don't let them replace me. Don't let them replace me. The words hit Jungkook harder than anything else that night. Harder than the concert chaos. Harder than the media headlines. Harder than the public exposure on stage. Because this was the real truth underneath everything. Not fear of pain, not fear of scandal, fear of being left behind. Jungkook tightened his grip around Jimin immediately while staff rushed toward them in panic. Hey, look at me. Jimin's eyes stayed half-focused, exhaustion finally crashing through every wall he'd forced up for months. RM quickly moved beside them. Get the medical team now. No hospitals, Jimin whispered instantly. Even in this condition, that was still his first instinct. Protect the image, protect the group, protect everyone except himself. Jungkook's voice sharpened immediately. Stop! Jimin blinked slowly. Jungkook lowered himself slightly so they were eye level. You don't get to worry about any of that right now. Jimin tried to answer, but his breathing stayed uneven. Jin grabbed bottled water nearby, while Hobai cleared staff away from crowding too close. Taehyung shut the meeting room doors completely. blocking cameras and unnecessary personnel from entering. BTS instincts again. Protect first. Always. The hotel medical staff finally arrived moments later carrying emergency kits, while managers argued nervously in the hallway outside. But inside the suite, the atmosphere had shifted into something deeply personal now. Because the members weren't just seeing an injured teammate anymore. They were seeing how terrified Jimin truly became underneath months of pressure and silence. The doctor knelt beside the couch carefully while checking Jimin's condition. "You need proper rest immediately." Jimin nodded weakly without arguing this time. That alone worried everyone. Jungkook stayed beside him the entire examination, close enough that their shoulders touched whenever the doctor adjusted Jimin's posture. RM watched quietly from nearby with guilt written all over his face. Finally, the doctor stood slowly. He's severely overexhausted. The room stayed silent, waiting for more. His body, been under stress for too long without enough recovery. Jungkook looked furious hearing it confirmed out loud. "Can he continue the tour?" one manager asked carefully. Jungkook turned so sharply toward him that the man immediately stepped backward. The doctor answered before Jungkook could explode. "Not like this." Silence. Heavy silence. Jimin closed his eyes immediately after hearing the sentence. Jungkook noticed the exact moment guilt hit him again, like he just failed everyone. Jungkook grabbed his hand instantly before he could spiral further into those thoughts. "Don't!" Jimin opened his eyes slowly. Jungkook's expression softened despite the anger still burning underneath everything. "None of this is your fault." Jimin looked unconvinced. Of course he did. RM finally stepped forward carefully. "The remaining schedules need to be discussed tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" Jungkook looked at him in disbelief. "You're still talking about schedules?" RM's exhaustion finally cracked visibly. "What do you want me to do?" Jungkook answered instantly. "Protect him. I've been trying. Not hard enough." The tension snapped tight again immediately. Jin stood quickly before another argument exploded. "Enough!" Everyone fell quiet. Jin rarely raised his voice seriously, which made the room still instantly. Looked directly at both RM and Jungkook. "This isn't helping him." Jungkook exhaled sharply and looked away, because Jin was right. Jimin already looked emotionally overwhelmed enough without another fight happening over him again. The doctor quietly packed equipment nearby before speaking once more. "He shouldn't be alone tonight." Jungkook answered immediately. "He won't be." The speed of the answer made several people glance toward him automatically, including Jimin. Jungkook didn't care anymore. "Not tonight." The doctor nodded once. "Keep monitoring his breathing and hydration. If symptoms worsen, call immediately." After the medical staff left, the suite finally grew quieter. Managers slowly moved discussions into separate rooms while security stayed stationed outside the private floor. Eventually, only the members remained inside the main lounge with dimmed lights and half-finished water bottles scattered everywhere from the chaos earlier. Nobody knew what to say anymore. The silence felt emotionally exhausted. Jimin sat wrapped in a blanket near the couch corner now while staring down at nothing. Jungkook remained beside him without moving away once. RM leaned against the far counter, rubbing his eyes tiredly. Taehyung quietly scrolled through updates on his phone before muttering, "It's getting worse online." "Stop reading it," Hobai sighed. Taehyung looked frustrated. "I'm trying to see what people are saying." Jin shook his head slowly. "People are scared." "Some are angry too," Taehyung admitted quietly. Jungkook frowned immediately. "At who?" Taehyung hesitated. "The company mostly." Then softer. "But some people think tonight proved the group's falling apart." The room went silent again. Jimin's expression tightened immediately hearing that. Jungkook noticed, always noticed. "Look at me." Jimin didn't move. Jungkook repeated softer this time. "Jimin." Slowly, Jimin looked up. Jungkook's voice stayed calm and firm. "We're not falling apart." Jimin's eyes looked emotional again. "You don't know that." "I do." Jimin laughed weakly. "How?" Jungkook didn't hesitate. "Because I won't let it happen." The words landed heavily in the room. RM looked away after hearing them, because deep down he probably wanted to believe them too. But leadership inside BTS in 2026 had become terrifyingly complicated. Pressure from the company, global schedules, individual careers, endless expectations. Even RM sometimes looked unsure how to keep all 7 members emotionally protected anymore. Jimin stared at Jungkook carefully for several long seconds before speaking quietly. "You can't protect everything." Jungkook answered immediately. "Maybe not." Then softer. "But I can protect you." Nobody spoke after that. Not because the words sounded romantic, because they sounded honest, deeply honest. The kind of honesty people usually only admit after being pushed too far emotionally to hide anymore. Jimin looked down again slowly. But this time, the sadness in his expression mixed with something else too. Relief. Small, fragile relief. Taehyung suddenly stood from the couch. I'm going downstairs for snacks before security completely loses their minds. Hobai immediately followed. I'm coming too. Jin stretched tiredly. Get me coffee. RM quietly excused himself to take another management call. And within minutes, the huge suite slowly emptied until only Jungkook and Jimin remained alone in the main lounge beneath the dim hotel lights. The silence felt completely different now. Softer, more dangerous emotionally. Jimin stared quietly at the Las Vegas skyline outside the massive windows while Jungkook sat nearby watching him carefully. Finally, Jimin spoke first. You should sleep. Jungkook almost laughed. You think I'm sleeping tonight? Jimin gave a tiny smile. Fair point. Another quiet silence settled between them. Then Jimin suddenly asked softly, Were you serious earlier? Jungkook frowned slightly. About what? Jimin looked down at the blanket wrapped around him. When you said I'm not replaceable to you. Jungkook's chest tightened instantly. Jimin, you don't have to answer if I was serious. Immediate answer, no hesitation. Jimin slowly looked back at him. Jungkook held his gaze steadily this time, no hiding, no joking around the feelings underneath anymore. You really thought I'd let anyone push you out of BTS? Jimin smiled sadly. Tonight kind of proved I don't know what people would allow anymore. Jungkook shook his head firmly. Not me. Jimin's eyes softened immediately hearing that. Jungkook leaned forward slightly, elbows resting against his knees now. Do you know what hurt most tonight? Jimin stayed quiet. Jungkook answered anyway. Finding out you've been scared this whole time without telling me. Jimin looked away again instantly. I didn't want to become another burden. Jungkook's expression cracked slightly. Why do you keep saying things like that? Jimin laughed quietly without humor. Because it's true sometimes. No. Jungkook's voice sharpened. It is. Jimin looked exhausted again. Jungkook, you don't understand how the conversations started changing this year. Then explain it. Jimin hesitated before speaking slowly. At first it was subtle. His fingers tightened slightly around the blanket. Questions about schedule flexibility, backup plans, which members were strongest for certain markets. Jungkook's jaw clenched immediately. Jimin continued quietly. Then after the second delay, they started talking like the group needed to become more adaptable. The word sounded disgusting coming from his mouth. Adaptable, Jungkook repeated coldly. Jimin nodded faintly. I heard one executive say the group had to prepare for long-term unpredictability. Jungkook looked furious. And you interpreted that as replacing you. Jimin finally looked directly at him again, eyes vulnerable in a way Jungkook almost never saw anymore. Wouldn't you? Silence, because honestly. Maybe he would too after hearing those conversations while injured and exhausted and isolated for months. Jungkook exhaled heavily before moving closer on the couch without fully realizing it. Listen to me carefully. Jimin stayed still. Jungkook's voice lowered softer now. BTS is 7 people, not 6. Not flexible versions, not temporary adjustments. Jimin's eyes looked glassy again immediately. Jungkook continued before fear stopped him. And if somebody ever asks me to perform without you because it's more convenient, he shook his head slowly. I'd walk off stage first. Jimin froze completely. The emotion on his face became impossible to hide now. Jungkook, I mean it. The honesty in Jungkook's voice filled the entire quiet room. No performance, no cameras. Just truth finally surfacing after years of hiding complicated emotions behind friendship and teamwork and loyalty. Jimin looked down quickly, overwhelmed again. You shouldn't say things like that. Jungkook frowned. Why? Jimin answered almost in a whisper. Because once you do, I start believing them. The sentence hung heavily between them, and for one terrifyingly honest moment, neither looked away. But before either of them could say anything else, Jungkook's phone suddenly started vibrating non-stop across the table beside them. He glanced down briefly. Then his expression changed instantly. Jimin noticed immediately. What? Jungkook slowly picked up the phone while staring at the screen. It's from the company. Jimin's entire body tensed automatically. Jungkook answered the call carefully. Hello? Silence filled the room while he listened. Then slowly, Jungkook's expression went cold, very cold. Jimin's heartbeat started pounding immediately just watching his face. Finally, Jungkook lowered the phone from his ear. The room stayed completely silent for several long seconds before Jimin finally whispered, "What happened?" Jungkook looked directly at him, and quietly, dangerously calm, he answered, "They want to discuss continuing the tour without you temporarily." The room went completely silent, not the normal kind of silence either. This one felt sharp, heavy enough to crush the air out of the suite entirely. Jimin stared at Jungkook like he'd stopped understanding the words for a second. "What?" His voice barely came out above a whisper. Jungkook still held the phone tightly in one hand, jaw locked so hard it looked painful. "Temporary adjustments," he repeated coldly. "That's the phrase they used." Jimin looked away immediately, too quickly. Like hearing the words out loud confirmed every fear he'd spent months trying to convince himself wasn't real. Jungkook noticed instantly. "No." Jimin stayed silent. "Don't do that." Jungkook leaned closer. "Don't disappear into your head right now." But Jimin's expression already looked distant, emotionally somewhere else entirely. "I knew it," he whispered. Jungkook's chest tightened hard. "Stop." Jimin laughed quietly without humor. "They were already thinking about it before tonight." "I don't care." "But I do." His voice cracked slightly now, "because this is exactly what I was afraid of." Jungkook stood immediately, packing once across the room, trying to control the anger flooding through him. "Unbelievable." Jimin stared down at his hands. "It makes sense." Jungkook turned so sharply it startled him slightly. "What?" Jimin forced himself to continue despite how exhausted he looked. "The tour can't stop forever because of one person." "You are not one person." "Jungkook, no." His voice rose again. "I'm so tired of hearing you talk about yourself like you're disposable." Jimin flinched slightly at the intensity in Jungkook's tone, not because he was scared, because hearing someone fight for him this hard emotionally almost seemed unfamiliar now. Jungkook rubbed both hands over his face roughly before speaking again, quieter this time. "Did they say how long?" Jimin looked confused. "What?" Jungkook glanced at the phone again like it physically disgusted him. "The temporary adjustment." Jimin swallowed slowly. "You don't have to tell me." "Yes, I do." Jungkook looked directly at him. "No more hiding things from each other tonight." Jimin's eyes softened slightly hearing that. Jungkook finally answered. "A few weeks, maybe longer depending on recovery." Jimin nodded faintly like he expected exactly that. The reaction alone made Jungkook furious again. "Why do you look unsurprised?" Jimin smiled sadly. "Because this industry always chooses movement over people eventually." Jungkook immediately shook his head. "Not BTS." Jimin looked at him carefully. "You really still believe that?" "Yes." "Even after tonight?" Jungkook stepped closer instantly. "Especially after tonight." The emotional tension between them tightened again. Jimin looked exhausted from more than just physical pain now. He looked emotionally defeated, and Jungkook hated it. Hated watching someone who spent years carrying BTS with quiet strength suddenly look like he was preparing himself to be left behind. "What did you tell them?" Jimin asked quietly. Jungkook's expression darkened instantly again. "Nothing nice." Despite everything, Jimin almost smiled briefly at that. Jungkook continued coldly, "I told them if they try to continue this tour without you, they can do it without me too." Jimin's head snapped up immediately. "You what?" "You heard me." "Jungkook." Real panic entered Jimin's voice now for the first time since the call. "You can't say things like that." "Why not?" "Because they'll take it seriously." Jungkook laughed bitterly. "Good." Jimin stood too quickly from the couch, immediately wincing from the sudden movement. Jungkook moved toward him automatically. "Careful." But Jimin ignored it completely. "Don't do that because of me." Jungkook stared at him in disbelief. "Are you serious right now?" "Yes." "They literally just suggested replacing you temporarily." "Adjusting schedules isn't replacing me." "Then why did you look terrified when I told you?" Silence. Jimin looked away again, and that silence answered everything. Jungkook exhaled slowly, trying to calm himself before speaking again. "Listen to me carefully." Jimin stayed quiet. "If they think BTS works normally without you standing beside us." Jungkook shook his head firmly. "Then they never understood BTS at all." Jimin's eyes looked emotional instantly. "You don't have to protect me from reality." "I'm not protecting you from reality." Jungkook stepped closer again until barely any space remained between them. "I'm protecting you from people making you feel less important than you are." Jimin's breathing became uneven again. Not physical this time, emotional. The room suddenly felt too small, too honest, too dangerous after everything they'd both admitted tonight. Jungkook lowered his voice softer. "Do you know what really scares me?" Jimin slowly shook his head. Jungkook's expression cracked slightly. That you were suffering this badly while genuinely believing we'd keep moving without you. Jimin looked down immediately. I didn't know any more. That answer hurt more than anything else. Jungkook reached forward carefully this time, brushing his fingers briefly against Jimin's wrist. Gentle, careful. Then I should have reminded you sooner. The atmosphere between them shifted instantly again after that. Quieter, more intimate emotionally than either of them usually allowed. Jimin's eyes stayed locked on Jungkook's hand for half a second too long before looking back up slowly. You always do this. Jungkook frowned slightly. Do what? Jimin smiled faintly through the sadness. Say things that make it impossible for me to stay distant from you. Jungkook's heartbeat kicked harder immediately. The honesty tonight kept getting more dangerous. Because both of them were too emotionally exhausted now to hide behind jokes anymore. Before Jungkook could answer, the suite doors suddenly opened again. RM entered first looking deeply tired, while Taehyung and Jin followed behind him carrying drinks and snacks nobody actually wanted anymore. Hobi arrived last while checking his phone anxiously. The second they saw Jungkook and Jimin standing close together in complete silence, the atmosphere in the room shifted awkwardly. Especially after noticing Jimin's emotional expression, RM immediately sensed something changed. What happened? Jungkook answered without hesitation. The company wants to continue the tour without Jimin temporarily. Silence exploded across the room instantly. Jin looked horrified. Taehyung's expression darkened immediately. Hobi muttered, You've gotta be kidding. RM closed his eyes briefly like he already suspected this conversation was coming eventually. It wasn't finalized, he said carefully. Jungkook looked at him sharply. You knew, RM rubbed his forehead slowly. There were discussions. Jimin laughed quietly again, empty. Of course there were. Jin stepped forward immediately. Nobody agreed to anything. Jimin looked tired. Doesn't matter, the idea existed. Taehyung suddenly spoke colder than usual. That idea should have never existed. Everyone looked toward him. Taehyung rarely showed anger openly, which made the atmosphere instantly heavier. BTS without one member isn't BTS, he continued quietly. Especially not like this. Hobi nodded firmly beside him. We all know that. RM stayed silent too long again. Jungkook noticed instantly. Taehyung. RM looked exhausted beyond words now. You think I wanted these conversations happening? Then shut them down. RM's composure finally cracked slightly. I've been trying to hold everything together for months. The room went quiet immediately. RM almost never raised his voice emotionally anymore. Schedules, he continued tiredly. Contracts, global commitments, every side pulling in different directions. He looked toward Jimin finally. And him refusing to slow down because he thought everyone would resent him if he did. Jimin lowered his eyes again. Jungkook's frustration softened slightly hearing the pain in RM's voice now too, because maybe RM wasn't failing them intentionally. Maybe he was drowning under impossible pressure just like everyone else. Jin sat down heavily on the couch. This whole thing's become insane. It already was insane, Taehyung muttered quietly. Hobi looked toward Jimin carefully. What do you want? The question changed the room instantly, because nobody had actually asked Jimin that directly all night. Not the company, not management, not even the members sometimes. Everyone kept reacting around him instead of asking what he truly wanted. Jimin looked surprised by the question himself. He stopped, because honestly, he didn't know anymore. Part of him wanted rest desperately. Another part felt terrified that stepping away even briefly would permanently change his place inside BTS forever. Jungkook watched the conflict move across Jimin's face in real time. You don't have to decide tonight, he said softly. Jimin looked at him immediately. Jungkook continued. And you definitely don't have to decide based on fear. RM slowly nodded after hearing that. He's right. Jimin laughed quietly. Funny. Everyone sounds supportive now after the whole world already watched me break down publicly. The sentence hurt because it was true. Tonight forced honesty nobody had managed before. The emotional walls finally collapsed only after things reached disaster level. Taehyung sat beside Jimin carefully. We should have noticed sooner. Jimin shook his head immediately. I hit it well. Jungkook muttered under his breath. Too well. The room fell quiet again. Then suddenly another phone started vibrating loudly across the table. RM glanced down at the screen. His entire expression changed instantly. Jungkook noticed immediately. What now? RM answered slowly. The company released a statement draft already. Jin frowned. Without talking to us. RM kept staring at the screen. They're calling tonight an unexpected exhaustion incident and saying future tour schedules may be adjusted accordingly. Jimin went completely still hearing those words. Jungkook stepped closer immediately. Adjusted accordingly. RM looked up finally, and quietly, carefully, he answered. They're preparing the public for the possibility of continuing without him temporarily. The room exploded into overlapping voices instantly. Jin stood up angrily. Hobi cursed under his breath. Taehyung looked genuinely furious now, but Jungkook didn't say anything at all, and somehow that silence became the most dangerous thing in the room. Because the second Jimin looked toward him again, he realized Jungkook's expression had completely changed. Calm now, too calm, like he'd already made a decision nobody else was ready to hear yet. The room slowly fell quiet again after the initial shock passed, but the silence now felt worse than shouting, because everybody understood what that statement really meant. The company wasn't just reacting to tonight anymore. They were preparing the public emotionally for the idea of BTS moving forward without Jimin standing on stage beside them. Even temporarily, the implication felt devastating. Jimin sat completely still on the couch while the others argued around him. His expression looked strangely calm now, too calm, like the panic had already passed and left something emptier behind. Jungkook noticed immediately. Hey! Jimin didn't react. Jungkook stepped closer. Jimin! Slowly, Jimin looked up, and something in his eyes made Jungkook's chest tighten painfully. Resignation. The kind that only appears after someone loses the energy to keep fighting anymore. RM was still reading through the statement draft in disbelief. They can't release this without approval. Hobi shook his head sharply. They're trying to control the narrative before rumors get worse. Taehyung crossed his arms tightly. By sacrificing him first. Nobody answered that, because honestly, that's exactly what it felt like. Jungkook finally spoke. Calm, controlled, dangerous. Tell them not to release it. RM looked exhausted. It's not that simple. Make it simple. RM looked up sharply. You think I haven't been trying? Then try harder. The tension snapped tight again immediately. Jin stepped between them before the conversation exploded further. Enough! But Jungkook barely seemed to hear him anymore. His focus stayed completely locked on Jimin, because while everyone argued about statements and schedules and management politics, Jimin still hadn't spoken once. That silence scared Jungkook most of all. Say something, Jungkook said softly toward him. Jimin smiled faintly without humor. What do you want me to say? Anything real. Jimin looked away again. I'm tired. Jungkook lowered himself beside him immediately. Then stop carrying this alone. Jimin laughed quietly. Bit late for that now. The sentence hurt because it was true. Tonight should have never reached this point. None of them should have allowed Jimin to spiral so deeply into fear and exhaustion before finally noticing how bad things became. Taehyung suddenly muttered while staring at his phone. Fans already hate the statement. RM looked up instantly. What? Taehyung turned the screen slightly. Someone leaked part of the wording online. Hobi groaned softly. Already? Hashtags are exploding again. Jin rubbed his face tiredly. This night seriously refuses to end. But Jimin barely reacted anymore. He just kept staring down at the floor while the room buzzed around him. Jungkook watched him carefully for several seconds before quietly asking, What are you thinking right now? Jimin answered without looking up. That maybe everybody would have less problems if I just stepped back for a while. Immediate silence. Every member froze hearing it. Jungkook's expression changed instantly. No. Jimin finally looked at him again. You know I'm right. You seriously believe that? Jimin swallowed slowly. The group, under pressure. The company's panicking, fans are scared, and now the whole world's talking about whether BTS can continue because of me. Jungkook shook his head sharply. No. They're talking because the company handled this horribly. Still happened because of me. Jungkook stood suddenly, frustration spilling over again. Why do you keep turning yourself into the villain tonight? Jimin flinched slightly. RM stepped forward carefully. Jungkook. No. Jungkook looked directly at Jimin. You pushed yourself until you collapsed because you thought everybody needed you perfect all the time. His voice cracked slightly now under the emotion. And somehow you're still blaming yourself for it. Jimin stared at him quietly. Jungkook continued softer this time. You know what I saw tonight? The room stayed silent. I saw someone so scared of becoming a burden that he destroyed himself trying not to be one. Jimin's eyes became glassy immediately. Taehyung looked away first. Hobi rubbed his forehead slowly. Even RM looked visibly emotional hearing the truth spoken out loud like that. Jungkook exhaled shakily before sitting beside Jimin again, closer this time. I'm angry, he admitted quietly, but not at you. Jimin's voice came out barely audible. Then at who? Jungkook looked around the room once. Everyone. Silence again. The company. Jungkook's jaw tightened. The schedules, the pressure, us too. He glanced briefly toward the other members. We all missed how bad things got. RM looked down immediately. Jin sighed heavily. Nobody argued because nobody could. Jimin suddenly spoke softly. You didn't miss it. Jungkook frowned slightly. What? Jimin finally met his eyes again. You noticed something was wrong before everyone else. Jungkook's chest tightened. Not soon enough. Jimin shook his head faintly. Still earlier than the rest. The honesty between them filled the room again. Dangerous, intimate, impossible to ignore now. Jin quietly stood. I'm getting coffee before this conversation emotionally destroys me. Hobai immediately followed with a tired laugh. Same. Taehyung lingered briefly before squeezing Jimin's shoulder once gently. Don't make decisions tonight. Jimin nodded weakly. RM stayed longer near the windows, staring out at the Las Vegas skyline silently before finally speaking without turning around. I'm sorry. The room went still again. Jimin looked surprised. RM slowly faced them, exhaustion written across every part of him now. I should have protected you better. Jimin immediately shook his head. Taehyung, no. RM's voice stayed quiet but firm. You trusted us to notice when things got too heavy. He looked genuinely devastated, and somehow we let you feel alone instead. Jimin's eyes filled instantly hearing that. Jungkook looked away briefly because suddenly the entire room felt too emotional to breathe inside. RM continued carefully. No statements get released tonight without member approval. I'll handle that. Jungkook nodded once sharply. Good. RM looked toward him then. Long quiet pause. And you? Jungkook frowned slightly. What about me? RM's expression softened tiredly. Stop acting like you have to carry this alone too. Jungkook froze slightly hearing the parallel. RM noticed everything tonight too, the protectiveness, the fear, the emotional unraveling happening between Jungkook and Jimin underneath all the chaos. Jungkook looked away. I'm fine. The entire room almost laughed bitterly at the irony. Even Jimin smiled faintly for the first time in a while. RM shook his head slowly. You sound exactly like him. Then quietly, RM left the room too. The suite finally became silent again. Just Jungkook and Jimin beneath dim city lights reflecting through the giant windows. Neither spoke for a while. The emotional exhaustion felt overwhelming now. Jimin leaned back slowly against the couch, eyes half closed again. Jungkook watched him carefully before finally asking, You really thought we'd continue without you? Jimin answered honestly this time. I thought eventually everybody would decide it was easier. Jungkook looked genuinely heartbroken hearing that. How long have you been carrying that fear? Jimin hesitated. Since the first injury delay. Jungkook closed his eyes briefly. Months. He'd been carrying this alone for months. Why didn't you tell me? Jimin smiled sadly again. Because I know how you are. Jungkook frowned, meaning, you love too hard when you care about someone. The sentence landed softly between them. Jungkook opened his eyes again slowly. Jimin continued quietly. And I didn't want to become another thing you felt responsible for. Jungkook stared at him for several long seconds before answering honestly. Too late. Jimin's breathing caught slightly. Jungkook leaned forward, elbows resting against his knees again while speaking carefully now. I don't know when exactly it happened. Jimin stayed very still. But somewhere along the way, Jungkook swallowed slowly. You stopped feeling like just another member to me. Silence. Complete silence. Jimin looked frozen. Jungkook's heartbeat pounded violently now, but he kept going anyway because tonight already destroyed every wall between them. And seeing you hurt like this, he shook his head slightly. It feels unbearable. Jimin's eyes looked overwhelmed instantly. Jungkook, you don't have to answer anything. Jungkook looked down briefly before meeting his gaze again. I just need you to understand why I can't stand there pretending this is only about schedules. The air between them felt electric now. Emotional in a way neither could safely step back from anymore. Jimin's voice came out soft, vulnerable. You really mean all this? Jungkook answered immediately. Every word. Jimin stared at him for several quiet seconds before something inside him finally cracked completely. His expression broke first, then his composure. He covered his eyes briefly with one hand while laughing shakily under his breath. I hate this. Jungkook moved closer instantly. Hey! Jimin shook his head slowly. You saying things like this right now? His voice cracked. After I spent months convincing myself nobody would choose me if things got difficult. Jungkook's chest physically hurt hearing that. Without thinking anymore, he reached forward carefully and pulled Jimin closer. Not dramatic, not rushed, just instinctive, protective. Jimin froze for half a second before finally leaning into him completely. Exhausted, emotionally destroyed, safe for the first time all night. Jungkook held him quietly while the Las Vegas lights flickered beyond the windows and the chaos outside continued growing online. And for a few fragile minutes, neither cared about the company, the rumors, or the headlines anymore. But then suddenly, Jungkook's phone started vibrating again against the table beside them. Neither moved immediately, until the screen lit brightly enough for both of them to see the caller ID clearly. Company president. Jimin slowly pulled back first. And the second Jungkook answered the call, his entire expression changed again. Cold, furious, dangerous. "No," he said immediately into the phone. Silence. Then quieter, sharper. "If you release that statement tonight," his jaw tightened hard, "you'll lose me too." The room fell completely silent after Jungkook's words. Even through the phone call, the tension became suffocating instantly. Jimin sat frozen beside him on the couch, eyes wide with shock while Jungkook listened to whatever the company president was saying on the other end. His expression only grew colder, more dangerous. "I don't care about investor panic right now," Jungkook said sharply. "I care that you're trying to turn him into a public sacrifice to protect schedules." Silence from the phone. Jungkook's jaw tightened harder. "No," another pause. "Then cancel the tour dates." Jimin immediately grabbed Jungkook's wrist softly. "Don't." Jungkook looked at him briefly but didn't back down. "You heard me." The voice on the phone became louder suddenly, loud enough that even Jimin could faintly hear angry responses through the speaker. Jungkook's eyes darkened instantly. "Don't talk about him like that." Jimin's stomach dropped hearing the tone in Jungkook's voice now, because this wasn't frustration anymore. This was fury, real fury, the kind Jungkook almost never showed publicly. "Then maybe you should have protected him before things got this bad," Jungkook continued coldly. Another burst of angry noise came through the phone. Jungkook stood abruptly from the couch. "No, I'm done listening." Jimin immediately stood too despite exhaustion. "Jungkook." Jungkook ignored him completely. "Release that statement and I'll go public myself." Silence. Heavy silence. Even the voice on the phone seemed stunned now. Jimin stared at Jungkook in disbelief. "You wouldn't," Jungkook answered without hesitation. "Watch me." The call ended suddenly. Jungkook lowered the phone slowly while breathing hard from anger. The suite stayed completely silent. Jimin looked genuinely shaken now. "What did you just do?" Jungkook laughed once bitterly. "Probably something the company's gonna hate." "Jungkook." Jimin stepped closer carefully. "You can't threaten them publicly." Jungkook looked at him sharply. "And they can threaten your place in BTS." Jimin froze. Jungkook's voice softened slightly after seeing the expression on his face. "I'm not letting them make you feel unwanted anymore." Jimin looked overwhelmed instantly hearing that. "You don't understand what happens when idols fight companies directly." "I don't care." "I do." Jungkook stepped forward immediately. "Why are you still trying to protect everyone except yourself?" Jimin opened his mouth to answer but stopped. Because honestly, he didn't know anymore. Maybe he'd been doing it so long that it became automatic. Protect the group, protect the image, protect the schedules, even if it destroyed him quietly in the process. Jungkook rubbed both hands over his face roughly before speaking again quieter now. "I can't watch this happen to you." Jimin's voice came out small. "Then what are you trying to do?" Jungkook looked directly into his eyes. "Claim my place beside you before somebody convinces you that you're standing alone." The sentence hit Jimin like physical impact. His breathing caught instantly. Jungkook realized how intimate the words sounded the second they left his mouth, but he didn't take them back. Not tonight, not anymore. Jimin stared at him silently for several seconds before whispering, "You really mean that?" Jungkook answered immediately. "Yes." The emotional tension between them became almost unbearable now, too honest, too exposed. Months of hidden feelings finally surfacing all at once under ugly hotel lights after the worst night of their careers. Before either of them could speak again, the suite doors suddenly opened. RM entered quickly alongside two managers, immediately sensing the atmosphere inside the room. Jungkook stepped back slightly. Jimin looked away fast, too fast. RM noticed everything anyway. "What happened?" Jungkook answered calmly. "I told them no statement gets released tonight." One manager looked nervous immediately. "Jungkook, and if it does?" Jungkook interrupted coldly. They can explain publicly why they're trying to continue BTS without one of its members. Silence crashed through the room instantly. RM closed his eyes briefly like a headache just formed behind them. You threatened them. Yes, publicly, potentially. The managers exchanged panicked looks. RM rubbed his forehead slowly. Do you understand how bad this could become? Jungkook answered immediately. Do you understand how bad it already is? Nobody spoke after that, because once again he wasn't wrong. Jimin quietly sat back down on the couch looking emotionally exhausted now. RM noticed immediately and shifted focus. How are you feeling? Jimin smiled faintly without humor, like the world's ending slightly. RM almost laughed tiredly at that. Almost. One of the managers carefully stepped forward holding a tablet. The statement release has been delayed for now. Jungkook's expression stayed cold. Good, but the company still wants emergency discussions tomorrow morning. Jimin lowered his eyes immediately hearing that. Jungkook noticed, always noticed. About what? The manager hesitated. Bad sign. Future schedule restructuring. Jungkook scoffed quietly. There it is again. RM took the tablet from the manager with visible frustration. Enough with that wording. The manager swallowed hard. Sir, investors are demanding reassurance. RM looked exhausted hearing it. People are not schedules. But even while saying it, RM sounded tired enough to know the industry rarely agreed. The managers finally left after confirming no statements would release overnight. The second the doors closed again, RM exhaled heavily and sat across from Jungkook and Jimin. You really scared them with that phone call. Jungkook shrugged slightly. Good. RM studied him carefully for a moment. You were serious, though. Not a question. Jungkook answered anyway. Yeah. RM looked toward Jimin then back toward Jungkook slowly, like pieces were finally connecting in his head tonight, too. You'd really walk away over this. Jungkook didn't hesitate. If they force him out, absolutely. Jimin's eyes widened immediately. Stop saying things like that. Jungkook turned toward him. Why? Because it's terrifying. The honesty in Jimin's voice silenced the room again. Jungkook's expression softened instantly. You think losing BTS scares me more than losing you inside it? Jimin looked completely overwhelmed now. RM quietly looked away toward the windows, suddenly feeling like he'd walked into a conversation much deeper than company politics. Jungkook lowered his voice carefully. I'm serious, Jimin. Jimin swallowed slowly. I know. Then believe me when I say you're not facing this alone anymore. Jimin's composure cracked slightly again. He looked down quickly before the emotion became too obvious. RM finally stood after a long silence. I'll handle the company meetings tomorrow. Jungkook immediately shook his head. No, we all go. RM frowned. That'll escalate things. Good. RM almost smiled tiredly despite himself. You've become impossible tonight. Jungkook answered quietly without looking away from Jimin. Maybe somebody should have been impossible sooner. RM noticed the look between them after that sentence. Long, emotional, unspoken things finally visible now if someone looked closely enough. RM sighed softly. Get some sleep, both of you. Then he left them alone again. The suite became quiet once more beneath the distant neon glow outside. Jimin leaned back slowly against the couch while staring toward the ceiling. Jungkook remained nearby watching him carefully. Finally Jimin spoke. You changed something tonight. Jungkook frowned slightly. What do you mean? Jimin looked at him softly. You stopped hiding how much you care. Jungkook's heartbeat kicked harder immediately. Maybe I got tired of pretending. Jimin smiled faintly. You're really bad at pretending lately. Jungkook almost laughed at that. Yeah. Jimin's expression softened again. I noticed before tonight, you know. Jungkook blinked slowly. Noticed what? Jimin hesitated briefly, then answered honestly. The way you watch me during rehearsals lately. Jungkook froze completely. Jimin continued quietly. The way you get angry when I skip meals. A tiny smile touched his lips. The way you always stand closer when things get stressful. Jungkook looked away briefly, suddenly embarrassed despite everything. Jimin noticed and smiled slightly wider for the first time all night. See, Jungkook muttered under his breath, you're impossible too. The atmosphere between them softened gently now, still emotional, still fragile, but warmer somehow beneath all the chaos surrounding them. Jimin looked down at his hands again after a moment. I think part of me knew. Jungkook looked back at him carefully. Knew what? Jimin's voice lowered almost to a whisper. That if things ever got really bad, he met Jungkook's eyes slowly, you'd be the one who stayed. The honesty in the sentence stole all the air from the room. Jungkook moved closer without even realizing it this time. Always. Immediate answer. Immediate truth. Jimin's expression broke slightly hearing it. Not sadness now. Relief. Like he'd been emotionally drowning for months and finally surfaced somewhere safe. Jungkook reached forward carefully, brushing loose hair away from Jimin's forehead gently before he could second-guess himself. Jimin froze at the touch. Neither moved away. The distance between them disappeared slowly, naturally, emotionally inevitable after everything tonight stripped away. Jimin's voice came out barely audible. "You really don't know what you're doing to me right now," Jungkook answered honestly. "I think maybe I finally do." Their eyes stayed locked for several long seconds. The world outside the suite kept moving. Headlines spreading, fans panicking, companies planning damage control. But inside this room, none of it existed for one fragile moment, just them, finally honest, finally unable to pretend anymore. Then suddenly loud knocking slammed against the suite doors, both of them startled apart instantly. Jungkook stood quickly while Jimin looked emotionally dazed. The knocking came again urgently. "Open up!" one of the managers shouted from outside. Jungkook immediately opened the door. The manager looked pale, panicked. "You need to see this right now." Jungkook frowned sharply. "What happened?" The manager held up a phone with shaking hands. "Someone leaked internal footage from backstage." Jimin's stomach dropped instantly. Jungkook grabbed the phone. And the second he saw the video thumbnail, his blood went cold. Because it was footage of Jimin nearly collapsing backstage earlier. And worse than that. The clip included audio of the company executive saying one sentence clearly enough for the entire world to hear now. "The concert continues no matter what condition he's in." The entire room froze. Jungkook stared at the phone screen in complete disbelief while the leaked video continued spreading rapidly online in real time. Grainy backstage footage, staff panic, Jimin barely able to stay standing, and then the executive's voice cutting clearly through the chaos. "The concert continues no matter what condition he's in." The manager looked sick. "It's everywhere already." Jimin's face lost all color instantly. RM rushed back into the suite after hearing the commotion while Taehyung and Jin followed close behind. "What now?" RM asked sharply. Jungkook silently handed him the phone. The second RM watched the clip, his entire expression hardened. "Who leaked this?" "Unknown source," the manager answered quickly. "But fans are furious." Furious was an understatement. Within minutes, hashtags demanding accountability exploded worldwide. Fans weren't just worried anymore. They were angry, protective. Devastated after seeing how far the situation actually went behind the scenes. Jin watched the clip once before immediately looking away. "This is bad," Hobai muttered quietly from the doorway. "No, this is catastrophic." Because now the narrative had completely changed. The public wasn't questioning Jimin anymore. They were questioning the company. And worse, people were realizing BTS members themselves looked emotionally shattered during the entire situation. Taehyung scrolled rapidly through reactions on his phone. Fans are saying he was forced on stage. Jungkook's jaw tightened instantly. Because he was. Silence crashed through the suite again. Jimin lowered his eyes immediately after hearing it spoken out loud so directly. RM rubbed both hands over his face tiredly. "This can't get uglier tonight." Another manager entered hurriedly. "Too late." Everyone turned. Major news outlets picked it up already. The manager swallowed hard. International articles are accusing the company of ignoring artist health concerns. Jimin suddenly stood from the couch. "Enough!" The room quieted immediately. He looked overwhelmed now, cornered emotionally from every direction. "I don't want this becoming a war." Jungkook stared at him in disbelief. "How are you still defending them?" Jimin looked exhausted. "Because if this explodes publicly, BTS gets dragged into it even more." Jungkook stepped toward him instantly. "You already got dragged into it." Jimin's composure cracked slightly again. "I know." The honesty hurt more than anger now. RM carefully lowered the phone onto the table. "We need to think clearly." "Clearly?" Jungkook almost laughed bitterly. "The whole world just watched them prioritize a concert over him collapsing backstage." RM's expression tightened. "I know what happened." "Do you?" Jungkook's voice sharpened emotionally again. "Because everybody keeps talking about schedules and statements while he's sitting here convinced he's replaceable." Jimin closed his eyes briefly hearing that. Taehyung quietly moved beside him, protective instinct obvious now too. "Sit down before you fall over again." Jimin obeyed automatically this time. Another terrifying sign of how exhausted he'd become. Jungkook noticed immediately, and his anger softened into concern again almost instantly. Always shifting back to concern around Jimin no matter how furious he got, the manager near the doorway spoke carefully. "The company president wants an emergency conference call immediately." Jungkook answered before RM could. "No." The manager blinked. "What? No calls tonight." RM looked conflicted. "Jungkook, no." His voice stayed calm but firm now. "They had enough control for one day." Silence followed again, because honestly, after the leaked footage, nobody trusted the company's judgment anymore. Not fully. Jin sat heavily on the couch nearby. "Fans are going to demand answers." "They deserve answers," Taehyung muttered quietly. RM glanced toward him in surprise. Taehyung rarely challenged management openly, but tonight changed everybody somehow. Hobi nodded slowly too. "They supported us through everything. Watching this without explanation will only hurt them more." Jimin suddenly looked up sharply. "No." Everyone turned toward him. His voice stayed soft but urgent. "Don't make this bigger." Jungkook looked stunned. "Jimin, I mean it." He swallowed slowly. "I don't want BTS remembered because of scandals." Jungkook stepped closer immediately. "And I don't want you remembered as someone people pushed until he broke." The room went silent again. Jimin looked emotionally overwhelmed hearing that. Jungkook lowered his voice softer now. "Do you know what fans are actually angry about?" Jimin didn't answer. Jungkook did anyway. "Not weakness." He crouched slightly beside the couch again. "They're angry because you were hurting and everybody acted like the show mattered more." Jimin stared at him quietly. Jungkook's expression softened painfully. "That's why people are upset." Jimin looked down slowly, because deep down maybe part of him needed to hear that. The suite suddenly buzzed again with multiple phones vibrating simultaneously, managers checking updates, staff whispering urgently. RM finally glanced at one notification and froze completely. Jungkook noticed immediately. "What?" RM looked up slowly. "The executive from the video just resigned." Silence. Immediate silence. Jin blinked. "Already?" RM nodded once. "Public pressure hit too fast." Taehyung looked cold now. "Good." But Jimin's expression only grew more troubled. "This is getting out of control." Jungkook shook his head immediately. "No, control already failed tonight." Jimin looked tired hearing that. "You don't understand what happens when companies panic." Jungkook answered quietly. "Maybe they should panic." Their eyes locked again, emotional tension crackling underneath every conversation now. Because beneath all the industry chaos, something deeply personal between them had finally changed tonight too. Neither could ignore it anymore. RM's phone rang again loudly. He answered quickly while stepping toward the windows. His expression darkened more with every second listening. Finally, he hung up slowly. "They're calling for a full member meeting downstairs." Jungkook immediately shook his head. "Absolutely not." "Jungkook, he's exhausted." RM looked conflicted again. "I know. Then stop acting like meetings matter more right now." Jimin suddenly spoke softly. "I'll go." Jungkook turned instantly. "No." Jimin met his eyes carefully. "I need to hear what they're planning." "No, you don't." "Yes, I do." Jungkook stepped closer again, frustration and fear mixing together visibly now. "Every time they talk about plans, you end up blaming yourself for everything." Jimin's eyes softened slightly. "You really noticed all that?" Jungkook looked almost offended. "Of course I noticed." The emotional honesty in his voice quieted the room again. Jin and Hobi exchanged tired looks nearby because at this point, even the members could clearly see how deeply Jungkook's feelings for Jimin ran. Maybe they always existed quietly beneath the surface. Tonight simply removed every reason to hide them anymore. RM interrupted carefully. "The meeting, about the tour." Jungkook answered immediately. "Then cancel it." RM sighed heavily. "You know it's not that easy." "Why?" Jungkook's voice sharpened again. "Because investors lose money." "Because thousands of people work on these tour too." Jungkook froze briefly. That answer hit differently, more complicated, more painful. Jimin noticed immediately and quietly said, "That's why this isn't simple." Jungkook looked at him frustrated. "So you'll destroy yourself to keep everybody else stable." Jimin's silence answered too much. Jungkook laughed once bitterly under his breath. "Unbelievable." Then suddenly Jimin reached forward carefully and grabbed Jungkook's wrist. Tiny movement, but enough to stop him instantly. "Don't look at me like that." Jungkook looked down at his hand around his wrist, then back at Jimin slowly. "Like what?" Jimin's voice came out almost vulnerable. "Like you're scared of losing me." The room went completely still. Jungkook didn't answer immediately because honestly, that was exactly how he looked. Jimin's fingers tightened slightly before he whispered, "I'm still here." Jungkook's expression cracked instantly hearing those words. Because maybe that was the real fear underneath everything tonight. Not companies, not scandals, losing him emotionally before anybody realized how badly he was drowning inside himself. Jungkook slowly sat beside him again, closer this time. "Then stay," he answered quietly. Jimin's breathing caught softly. Jungkook continued without looking away. "Stay long enough for people to stop making you feel like you have to earn your place beside us." Jimin looked completely overwhelmed now. The members nearby pretended not to react, but the emotional weight between them had become impossible to ignore anymore. Taehyung quietly cleared his throat and looked toward RM. "We should handle the company meeting ourselves first." RM nodded slowly, understanding immediately. Jin stood too. "Yeah," Hobai added carefully. "He needs rest more than another interrogation." RM looked toward Jimin gently. "You don't have to come downstairs." Jimin hesitated. Jungkook's hand quietly found his again beside the couch cushions before anyone noticed. Warm, steady, real, Jimin looked down briefly at their hands hidden between them, then finally nodded once. "Okay." Jungkook visibly relaxed immediately. Tiny change, but everyone noticed. RM definitely noticed. The leader looked away politely before speaking again. "We'll update you after." One by one, the members slowly left the suite with managers following behind. Soon only Jungkook and Jimin remained again beneath the dim hotel lights while distant Las Vegas traffic glowed outside the windows. The silence between them felt softer now, intimate in a way neither could safely deny anymore. Jimin finally whispered without looking up, "You held my hand in front of everybody." Jungkook glanced down briefly, realizing he still hadn't let go. "Yeah," Jimin smiled faintly. "Bold." Jungkook surprised himself by smiling slightly back. "Guess I stopped caring tonight." Jimin's eyes softened immediately hearing that. Then quietly, carefully, he asked the question both of them had been circling around for hours now. "What exactly are we doing?" Jungkook looked at him for a long moment before answering honestly. "I think," he swallowed slowly, "I think I'm finally done pretending you're just somebody I work with." The air between them shifted completely after that. Jimin's heartbeat visibly stuttered beneath the silence. Jungkook moved closer unconsciously again while the city lights flickered softly across their faces. Jimin's voice barely came out. "You really picked tonight to say all this." Jungkook answered quietly. "Tonight reminded me how badly I could lose you." And for the first time all night, Jimin reached for him first. Jimin's fingers curled gently around the front of Jungkook's hoodie, hesitant at first like he was still unsure whether this moment was real or just emotional exhaustion after the worst night of their lives. But he didn't pull away, and neither did Jungkook. The city lights outside reflected softly across the hotel windows while silence settled between them again. Not awkward silence this time, something deeper. Fragile, dangerous, honest. Jungkook looked down briefly at Jimin's hand gripping his hoodie before lifting his eyes slowly back to his face. Jimin's expression looked overwhelmed in a way Jungkook had never seen so clearly before, not because of fear now, because somebody finally chose him openly without asking him to keep performing first. "You really mean all this?" Jimin whispered again quietly like he still couldn't fully believe it. Jungkook answered immediately. "Every part of it." Jimin's breathing caught slightly. The emotional walls he spent months building were collapsing too fast tonight for him to stop anymore. He looked down briefly before laughing softly under his breath. "This is such terrible timing." Jungkook almost smiled. "Probably." Jimin shook his head slowly. "The whole world's exploding outside." "I know. The company might lose their minds tomorrow." Jungkook nodded once. "Very likely." Jimin finally looked back at him again. "And you still decided now was the moment." Jungkook's expression softened completely. "I thought I had more time before tonight." The honesty in that sentence hit Jimin harder than anything else, because he understood immediately what Jungkook meant underneath it. Fear. Real fear. Watching Jimin nearly collapse backstage shattered something inside him emotionally. Suddenly every unspoken feeling between them became impossible to keep delaying anymore. Jimin swallowed slowly. "You got scared." Jungkook looked directly into his eyes. "Terrified." No hesitation, no hiding, just truth. Jimin's composure broke slightly again hearing that word. He looked away fast before emotion overwhelmed him completely. But Jungkook gently reached forward this time, brushing his fingers against Jimin's wrist carefully. "Hey!" Jimin stayed quiet. Jungkook's voice lowered softer. "Look at me." Slowly, Jimin did. Jungkook's chest tightened instantly, seeing tears gathered faintly in his eyes now. You don't have to carry tonight alone anymore. Jimin laughed shakily under his breath. You keep saying things that completely ruin me emotionally. Jungkook almost smiled sadly. Good. Jimin shook his head. No, seriously. His voice cracked softly. I spent so long trying to convince myself nobody would stay if I stopped being useful. Jungkook's expression shattered immediately. Jimin. And then you walk in here threatening companies for me. A small disbelieving laugh escaped him. You're insane. Jungkook answered quietly. Only for you. Silence. Complete silence. Jimin stared at him like the world stopped moving entirely for a second. Jungkook realized how intense the sentence sounded after it left his mouth, but again, he didn't take it back. Couldn't anymore. Not after tonight stripped every layer of pretending away between them. Jimin's voice came out barely audible. You really don't hold back once you decide to be honest, huh? Jungkook shook his head slightly. Not with this. The emotional tension became overwhelming now. The distance between them already almost gone. Jimin's hand still lightly gripping Jungkook's hoodie. Jungkook's fingers resting softly against Jimin's wrist. Both of them breathing quieter now beneath the dim hotel lights. Then suddenly Jimin whispered something so soft Jungkook almost missed it. I think I've been waiting for this. Jungkook froze instantly. What? Jimin looked embarrassed immediately after admitting it. Nothing. Jungkook moved closer carefully. No, tell me. Jimin laughed nervously under his breath while looking down again. I said too much already. Jungkook gently tilted his chin upward before he could retreat emotionally again. Careful, slow, giving him every chance to pull away. Jimin didn't, their eyes locked. Tell me, Jungkook repeated softly. Jimin's breathing became uneven again, not fear, vulnerability. I think part of me knew, he admitted quietly. For a while now. Jungkook's heartbeat slammed hard against his ribs. Knew what? Jimin's expression softened painfully. That you looked at me differently. Silence filled the suite again. Jungkook didn't deny it, couldn't. Jimin smiled faintly through obvious emotion. You stopped hiding it as well as you thought. Jungkook laughed quietly under his breath. Apparently. Jimin looked at him carefully for several seconds before continuing. I just didn't think. He stopped briefly. I didn't think you'd ever actually say it. Jungkook's voice lowered almost to a whisper now too. I didn't either. Because honestly, he hadn't planned any of this. Not tonight, not like this. But seeing Jimin breaking apart emotionally while still apologizing to everyone around him forced every hidden feeling inside Jungkook violently into the open. Jimin slowly let go of Jungkook's hoodie only to move his hand gently against Jungkook's wrist instead. Softer. Intimate in a way neither of them could mistake anymore. You know this changes everything. Jungkook answered immediately. I know. The members definitely noticed already. Probably. Jimin almost laughed again. Taehyung definitely noticed. Jungkook actually smiled slightly this time. Taehyung notices everything. The warmth between them finally returned a little beneath the emotional wreckage of the night. Jimin looked exhausted still, but lighter somehow too. Like being chosen openly allowed him to breathe differently for the first time in months. Jungkook noticed immediately. You should rest. Jimin frowned slightly. You're still hovering. Absolutely. Jimin smiled faintly. Hopeless. Jungkook's expression softened again, seeing the small, real smile finally reaching his eyes. He hadn't seen that look on Jimin's face in too long, and suddenly the realization hit him painfully hard. Jimin really had been drowning quietly for months while still trying to smile through everything publicly. Jungkook looked down briefly before asking softly, Were you really gonna leave? Jimin blinked slightly. What? Jungkook swallowed slowly. If the company pushed hard enough. The question changed the atmosphere immediately again. Jimin looked away toward the windows silently. That silence alone terrified Jungkook. Jimin finally answered quietly. I thought about it. Jungkook felt physically sick hearing that. Why? Jimin's voice stayed soft. Because I didn't want BTS to become smaller because of me. Jungkook moved closer instantly. You leaving would make BTS smaller. Jimin closed his eyes briefly hearing that. Jungkook continued carefully. Do you really not understand how important you are to us? Jimin laughed weakly. Tonight made that very confusing. Jungkook's expression hardened again, remembering the company conversations. Then listen to me instead. Jimin slowly looked back toward him. Jungkook's voice stayed calm, steady, certain. There is no version of BTS where I'm okay watching you disappear from it. The sentence settled deeply into Jimin's chest. He looked emotional instantly again. You really would have walked away too. Not a question now, realization. Jungkook nodded once. Without hesitation, Jimin stared at him silently for several seconds before suddenly covering his face briefly with one hand again. This is ridiculous. Jungkook frowned slightly. What is? Jimin laughed shakily. I'm sitting here emotionally falling apart because you care about me too much. Jungkook reached forward, gently pulling his hand away from his face again. Good. Jimin's eyes looked glassy under the city lights. You say good to everything tonight. Jungkook smiled faintly. Only the important things. Silence returned again, softer now, their foreheads almost touching without either fully realizing how close they'd moved together during the conversation. Jimin whispered carefully, What happens tomorrow? Jungkook answered honestly. Probably chaos. Jimin laughed quietly. Accurate. Jungkook's expression became serious again, though. But whatever happens, he held Jimin's gaze steadily. You're not facing them alone anymore. Jimin looked overwhelmed once more by the certainty in Jungkook's voice, like he still wasn't used to somebody standing beside him this openly without conditions attached. Then quietly, almost shyly, Jimin admitted something else. I think that's what scares me most. Jungkook frowned slightly. What does? Jimin looked at him softly. Actually believing you. The sentence landed directly in Jungkook's chest, because maybe that was the deepest damage tonight revealed. Jimin had spent so long feeling emotionally replaceable that unconditional loyalty now felt frightening instead of comforting. Jungkook moved one hand gently against Jimin's cheek before he could overthink it. Careful, slow. Jimin leaned into the touch immediately without even realizing it himself. Jungkook's voice lowered almost to a whisper. Then believe me slowly. Jimin's eyes closed briefly at the warmth in Jungkook's hand. The emotional intimacy between them became overwhelming now. Real, unavoidable. Months, maybe years, of unspoken feelings finally sitting openly between them without either pretending otherwise anymore. And then suddenly, the suite doors burst open again. Both of them jerked apart instantly. Taehyung stood in the doorway breathing hard while holding his phone tightly. His expression looked serious, very serious. Jungkook stood immediately. What happened? Taehyung looked directly at Jimin first before answering quietly. The company just announced an emergency press conference for tomorrow morning. Silence. Jimin's stomach dropped instantly. Jungkook's expression went cold again. Taehyung swallowed hard before continuing. And media outlets are saying they're preparing to announce major changes to the tour. The warmth inside the room vanished instantly. 1 second earlier, Jimin had been leaning into Jungkook's hand beneath quiet hotel lights. The next, reality crashed back through the suite doors hard enough to steal the air from both of them again. Taehyung stood frozen near the entrance holding his phone tightly while tension spread across his face. Jungkook's expression darkened immediately. What kind of changes? Taehyung looked uneasy for the first time all night. Nobody knows yet. Jimin slowly stood from the couch despite exhaustion visibly weighing on his body again. No, Jungkook turned instantly. Sit back down. I can't. Jimin's breathing already looked uneven from stress alone now. If they hold a press conference without us knowing what's happening, then we stop it. Jungkook answered immediately. Jimin looked frustrated now. You can't stop every single thing by fighting people. Jungkook stepped closer. Watch me. Taehyung sighed tiredly. You two seriously sound like you're about to start a war together. The sentence slipped out casually, but the atmosphere changed anyway, because somehow it felt true. Jungkook glanced toward Jimin briefly before looking back at Taehyung. Where? RM? Downstairs still. Taehyung crossed his arms tightly. The company's panicking harder now because of the leaked video. Jimin lowered his eyes immediately again hearing that reminder. Jungkook noticed instantly. Stop doing that. Jimin looked up tiredly. Doing what? Looking guilty every time somebody mentions the video. Jimin swallowed slowly. People got hurt because of this. No, Jungkook's voice sharpened. People got exposed because of this. Silence filled the suite again. Taehyung quietly looked between them both now, clearly noticing how different everything felt emotionally compared to earlier tonight. Not just concern anymore. Something deeper had finally surfaced between them, and neither was really hiding it anymore. Taehyung pretended not to comment directly, mostly. You know, he muttered while slipping his phone into his pocket, the way you keep staring at each other is making this situation even more dramatic. Jimin nearly choked on air. Jungkook looked offended instead. We're literally in the middle of a crisis. Taehyung nodded calmly. Exactly, and somehow this still feels like watching a drama. Jimin covered part of his face briefly while Jungkook muttered under his breath, unbelievable. But despite the tension, the moment softened the atmosphere slightly again. Even Jimin laughed quietly for half a second before exhaustion pulled him serious again. Taehyung noticed immediately. "You should really rest." Jimin shook his head. "I won't sleep anyway." Jungkook answered instantly. "Then at least sit down before you fall over again." Jimin gave him a look. "You've become extremely bossy." "Only tonight?" Jungkook shot back automatically. Taehyung actually smiled faintly seeing that. Because maybe this was the first real moment tonight where Jimin sounded slightly like himself again instead of emotionally collapsing under guilt. Then suddenly Taehyung's phone buzzed again. His expression changed immediately after checking it. "RM wants us downstairs now." Jungkook frowned. "Why?" Taehyung looked directly at him. "Because apparently the company already drafted another statement." Immediate silence. Jimin looked exhausted just hearing the word statement now. Jungkook's jaw clenched hard. "What does it say?" Taehyung hesitated. "Bad sign. They want to announce temporary group restructuring during recovery periods." The room went still, completely still. Jimin looked down instantly. Jungkook went cold beside him. "Restructuring," he repeated dangerously calm. Taehyung nodded slowly. "They're avoiding directly saying performances without Jimin." Jungkook laughed once, sharp, humorless. "Cowards," Jimin quietly whispered. "Maybe they're trying to protect the group." Jungkook turned toward him so fast it startled him slightly. "Stop defending this." Jimin looked emotionally drained now. "Then tell me what I'm supposed to do." The vulnerability in his voice silenced everyone immediately. "If I fight back, the scandal grows bigger. If I stay quiet, people say I'm weak. If I leave temporarily, fans panic. If I stay..." His voice cracked softly. "Everybody gets hurt anyway." Jungkook's anger disappeared instantly hearing that. He stepped closer carefully. "Hey." Jimin looked away again fast. "I'm serious. What's the right answer here?" Jungkook lowered his voice softer now. "There isn't one perfect answer." Jimin laughed bitterly. "Great, but there is one thing I know." Slowly, Jimin looked back at him. Jungkook held his gaze steadily. "You shouldn't have to solve this alone." The room quieted again. Taehyung looked away toward the windows politely because suddenly the emotional tension between them felt almost too personal to stand inside comfortably anymore. Jimin stared at Jungkook silently before whispering, "You really mean staying beside me through this?" Jungkook answered immediately, "I already told you." Jimin's expression softened painfully again, then quietly, carefully, he admitted something else. "Nobody's ever fought for me this openly before." Jungkook's chest tightened hard hearing that. "Then people around you failed." Jimin shook his head faintly. "No." He looked directly at Jungkook now. "I think you just care differently." Silence settled heavily after that, because deep down, both of them knew it was true. Jungkook's feelings stopped fitting inside normal friendship lines a long time ago. Tonight simply forced them into the open where neither could deny them anymore. Taehyung finally cleared his throat awkwardly. "Okay, before this turns into a full emotional confession scene." Both of them immediately looked away from each other at the exact same time. Taehyung smirked slightly. "Downstairs, now." Jungkook muttered under his breath while grabbing his hoodie. "I miss when you minded your business." Taehyung answered instantly. "I minded my business for like 3 years watching whatever this is." Jimin nearly laughed again despite himself. Tiny moment, but important. Because for a second, the crushing emotional weight lifted just enough for him to breathe. Jungkook noticed immediately, and that alone made the entire fight tonight worth it to him somehow. The three of them quietly moved through the private hotel hallway toward the elevators while security stayed stationed nearby. The atmosphere outside the suite felt tense everywhere now. Staff whispering, managers rushing between rooms, phones constantly buzzing with updates. Everyone looked nervous, because BTS in 2026 wasn't just a music group anymore. It was a global machine involving massive tour, investors, media partnerships, streaming deals, entire industries connected to their schedules. And tonight that machine cracked publicly for the first time in years. As the elevator doors closed, silence settled between them again. Jimin leaned lightly against the mirrored wall looking exhausted while Jungkook stayed beside him close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Taehyung quietly pretended not to notice. Then softly, Jimin asked without looking up, "Do you regret saying all that tonight?" Jungkook answered immediately. "Not even slightly." Jimin's expression shifted subtly at the certainty in his voice. Even though everything, becoming more complicated now. Jungkook looked directly at him. "You were worth complicating things for." Taehyung quietly looked toward the ceiling immediately like he suddenly became fascinated by elevator lighting. Wow, he muttered. You two are insane. Jimin's face turned visibly warm while Jungkook actually looked slightly embarrassed for once. Can you stop reacting to every sentence? Taehyung shrugged calmly. Can you stop saying life-changing emotional statements every 30 seconds? The elevator doors opened before Jungkook could answer. The hallway outside the conference floor looked chaotic. Security everywhere, managers rushing around, staff whispering anxiously near meeting rooms. The second BTS members appeared, the atmosphere shifted immediately. Everyone straightened nervously. Jimin slowed slightly walking through the hallway after noticing the looks people gave him now. Sympathy, worry, guilt. Jungkook immediately moved closer beside him protectively. Small movement. Obvious enough that several staff members exchanged glances quietly. Jimin noticed too. Jungkook, what? You're hovering again. Correct. Taehyung nearly smiled beside them. Then RM suddenly emerged from the main conference room looking more exhausted than anyone had ever seen him. The second he saw Jimin walking toward the meeting area, his expression changed. Why are you here? Jimin answered softly. Because this affects me. RM looked conflicted immediately before sighing heavily. Fine. But this won't be easy. Jungkook muttered quietly. That's becoming the theme tonight. RM ignored the comment and motioned them inside. The conference room atmosphere felt ice cold. Executives seated around long tables, legal teams, PR staff, multiple screens displaying exploding global headlines about BTS and Jimin. The second Jimin entered the room, conversations stopped completely. Jungkook noticed every single executive looking uncomfortable now after the leaked footage backlash. Good, one executive carefully stood. Thank you for coming, Jungkook answered immediately. Get to the point. The executive swallowed slightly before continuing. Due to public concern and ongoing recovery uncertainty, we believe temporary restructuring remains the safest path forward for tour continuation. Jimin's shoulders subtly tensed beside him. Jungkook saw it instantly. And then the executive made the worst possible mistake. This would allow BTS activities to continue efficiently while Jimin focuses on health management. Efficiently. The word shattered whatever patience Jungkook had left. He leaned forward slowly against the conference table. Calm, cold, dangerous. Say that one more time. Silence crashed through the room immediately. The executive looked nervous now. Jungkook's eyes never left him. Go ahead. His voice dropped lower, sharper. Explain to me how BTS becomes more efficient by removing him from it. Nobody answered Jungkook immediately. The entire conference room sat frozen beneath cold white lights, while executives exchanged nervous looks across the long table. Jimin stood silently beside Jungkook, exhaustion visible in every part of him now, but his eyes stayed, locked on the executive who used that word. Efficient. Like this was all just numbers and scheduling charts, instead of people who'd spent over a decade building BTS together. Jungkook leaned slightly closer across the table. I'm waiting. The executive swallowed hard before attempting carefully. What we mean is operational stability during uncertain recovery timelines. Jungkook laughed once quietly, dangerous. That sounded even worse. RM rubbed his forehead slowly from the head of the table. Enough corporate wording. Silence followed, because honestly, RM looked exhausted from hearing it too. The executive shifted nervously. We're trying to protect the group long-term. Jimin suddenly spoke softly before Jungkook could. By separating me from it. The room went still again. The executive immediately shook his head. No, that's not what we're saying. Jimin smiled faintly without humor. Then explain it differently. Nobody did. Nobody could, because every version of the conversation still sounded like one thing underneath all the polished language, BTS continuing without him. Jungkook saw Jimin's expression changing beside him again. That distant look returning slowly, emotional retreat, like he was preparing himself mentally to accept it anyway. Jungkook stepped slightly closer immediately. No. Jimin looked at him quietly. Jungkook's voice softened only for him. Don't disappear again. Jimin's composure cracked slightly hearing that in front of everyone. Several executives looked visibly uncomfortable now because suddenly the situation no longer felt like normal business discussions. It felt personal, emotional, real. RM finally stood from his chair slowly. Let's stop pretending this is only about scheduling. The room quieted instantly. RM looked around the conference room carefully. One of our members pushed himself beyond exhaustion because he felt terrified of becoming replaceable. Silence, heavy silence. And instead of addressing that, RM continued colder now, we're discussing restructuring plans less than 12 hours later. Several executives lowered their eyes immediately. Jungkook almost looked surprised hearing RM say it so directly. Jimin did too. RM turned toward the screens displaying headlines and fan reactions flooding worldwide. People are angry because they watch someone suffer while feeling responsible for everyone around him. He looked back toward the executives. And honestly, his voice sharpened slightly. So am I. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Because if RM openly stopped protecting the company narrative, everything changed. One PR director carefully spoke up. We understand the emotional reactions, but public trust also requires reassurance about future stability. Taehyung suddenly laughed quietly from the back of the room. Everyone turned. You know what's crazy? He asked calmly. Fans would probably trust us more if everybody stopped talking like robots for 5 minutes. Jin nodded immediately beside him. Seriously. Hobai crossed his arms tightly. Nobody wants polished statements tonight. Jimin looked stunned, realizing the entire group was finally speaking openly now. Not carefully, not diplomatically, honestly, and somehow all of them were standing beside him. The realization visibly shook him emotionally. Jungkook noticed immediately. See. Jimin looked toward him slowly. Jungkook held his gaze. You really thought you were alone in this? Jimin looked away quickly before emotion became too obvious again. But this time the guilt inside his expression had changed slightly. Softer now. Less isolated. One executive finally sighed heavily. Then what exactly are you all asking for? Jungkook answered immediately. No restructuring. RM added firmly. No public framing that suggests BTS functions normally without 7 members. Jin nodded. And no more pushing people until they collapse just to avoid disappointing investors. The room stayed silent after that, because suddenly BTS members themselves weren't divided anymore. They stood united. And the company clearly wasn't prepared for that shift. Jimin quietly whispered almost to himself, You guys really mean this? Taehyung looked directly at him. Obviously. Hobai smiled faintly. You're seriously annoying if you still don't understand that. Jimin laughed softly under his breath despite tears gathering in his eyes again. Jin noticed immediately and looked away politely to give him a second. Jungkook didn't look away at all. The executive at the far end of the table finally spoke carefully. If tour delays continue, there will be significant consequences financially and publicly. Jungkook answered coldly, then deal with consequences. Jungkook, RM warned quietly, but Jungkook kept going anyway. No, seriously. He looked around the room sharply. Everybody keeps talking like the worst possible outcome is losing money. Silence. Jungkook's voice lowered now, more emotional. Tonight I thought we might lose him instead. The entire room went completely still. Jimin froze beside him. Jungkook immediately realized how vulnerable the sentence sounded spoken out loud in front of everyone. But again, he didn't take it back. Couldn't. Jimin stared at him silently while emotion broke across his face all over again. RM quietly looked away toward the table. Taehyung rubbed his mouth briefly, trying not to react too obviously. Even the executives looked stunned now because the emotional reality of everything finally cut through the corporate atmosphere entirely. Jungkook swallowed slowly before continuing quieter. So honestly, he looked directly at the executives. I don't care about efficiency anymore. Jimin's breathing became uneven again hearing that, because nobody had ever chosen him over the machine this openly before. Not like this. RM finally exhaled heavily and sat back down. We postponed discussions about restructuring indefinitely. One executive immediately protested. But, RM interrupted sharply. Indefinitely. Silence followed. Then slowly, the executive nodded once, defeated for now. The tension inside the room eased slightly for the first time all night, but emotionally, everything already changed permanently. Jimin quietly sat down in one of the chairs nearby like his body finally stopped running on pure adrenaline alone. Jungkook immediately crouched slightly beside him. Hey! Jimin laughed shakily under his breath. I'm okay. Jungkook frowned instantly. You literally sound exactly like someone who's not okay. Tiny smile, weak but real. Fair. The members nearby softened visibly, seeing Jimin finally smiling slightly again instead of shutting down emotionally. RM looked toward him carefully. "You should go rest now." Jimin hesitated. "What about the press conference?" RM exchanged a look with the executives before answering calmly. "Cancelled." Jimin blinked in surprise. "What?" One PR manager sighed tiredly. "There's no safe way to hold a public conference after tonight's backlash." Taehyung muttered under his breath. "Good." Hobi nodded beside him. "Probably the smartest decision anybody's made in hours." Jungkook looked toward Jimin again carefully. "You hear that?" Jimin looked back at him softly. Jungkook's expression finally relaxed slightly for the first time all night. "Nobody's replacing you tomorrow." Jimin stared at him silently for several long seconds before emotion overwhelmed him again, too fast to fully hide. He looked down quickly, but not before Jungkook caught the tears slipping free anyway. Without hesitation, Jungkook reached over and gently wiped one away with his thumb despite the entire conference room still technically watching. Silence instantly returned again. Taehyung looked toward the ceiling immediately. Jin suddenly became very interested in bottled water labels. RM closed his eyes briefly like he physically could not deal with another emotional revelation tonight. Jimin looked stunned by the gesture himself. "Jungkook." Jungkook answered softly. "I'm tired of pretending I don't care when everybody already knows." The sentence hit the room like lightning. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Because after hours of circling around it emotionally, Jungkook finally said it openly enough that there was no misunderstanding left anymore. Jimin stared at him in complete silence while his heartbeat visibly pounded beneath the fragile calm finally settling over the night. Jungkook held his gaze steadily now. No fear left about hiding it, not after everything tonight exposed already. Jimin's voice came out barely audible. "You really chose the most chaotic night possible for this." Jungkook almost smiled softly. "Yeah." Jimin laughed shakily through obvious emotion. "Unbelievable." But despite the teasing words, the way he looked at Jungkook now completely changed. Open, vulnerable. Like maybe for the first time in months, he finally allowed himself to believe someone would stay beside him even at his weakest point. RM quietly stood again after a long silence. "Meeting over," nobody argued. The executives practically escaped the room afterward, leaving only BTS members behind beneath harsh conference lighting and emotional exhaustion. The second the doors shut fully, Taehyung finally pointed directly at Jungkook. "Okay, wow." Jungkook frowned immediately. "What?" Taehyung looked genuinely stunned. "You actually confessed during a corporate crisis meeting." Jin burst into tired laughter instantly. Even Hobi covered his face, laughing softly. Jimin looked horrified and embarrassed at the same time. "Taehyung." "No, seriously." Taehyung shook his head in disbelief. "That was insane." Jungkook muttered under his breath, "I hate all of you." RM finally laughed quietly too for the first time all night. Small sound, exhausted, but real. And somehow that tiny moment broke the unbearable tension enough for everyone to breathe again. Jimin looked around at the members slowly. Jin still laughing quietly. Hobi smiling tiredly. Taehyung openly amused. RM finally relaxing slightly after hours of pressure. And Jungkook beside him still looking ready to fight the entire world if necessary. The realization hit Jimin deeply then. They really hadn't abandoned him. Not one of them. And suddenly months of fear inside him cracked apart completely. Jimin covered his eyes briefly while laughing shakily under his breath. "I seriously almost left because I thought I was holding everybody back." Immediate silence again. Jungkook's expression softened painfully. RM spoke first. "You idiot." Jimin laughed harder through tears now. Jin moved closer immediately, wrapping one arm around his shoulders. "You should have told us sooner." Hobi nodded. "We would have dragged you to rest ourselves." Taehyung smirked slightly. "Especially him." He pointed toward Jungkook. "He already looked one bad day away from fighting management months ago." Jungkook looked offended. "That's not true." Every member stared at him silently. Jungkook paused. "Okay, maybe slightly true." Jimin laughed again, real laughter this time, tired, emotional, but genuine. And hearing that sound again after tonight's nightmare made something inside Jungkook finally unclench for the first time in months. Laughter slowly faded, but the warmth stayed. For the first time since the concert disaster, the room no longer felt like a battlefield. Exhausted, emotionally destroyed, but together. BTS together. Jimin sat quietly in his chair while the members stayed gathered around him beneath the harsh conference room lights that suddenly felt softer somehow. Jungkook remained beside him the entire time without even pretending otherwise anymore. RM loosened his tie slowly while exhaling heavily. Well. He looked around the room tiredly. Tonight officially became one of the worst nights of our careers. Jin immediately pointed toward Jungkook, and somehow also his confession night. Please stop calling it that, Jungkook muttered under his breath. Taehyung grinned instantly. Absolutely not. Jimin covered part of his face again while laughing softly from embarrassment. The sound alone made everybody visibly relax more. Because hearing Jimin laugh again after hours of watching him emotionally shut down felt almost surreal now. Hobai leaned against the conference table nearby. Honestly, I think the whole company was more scared of Jungkook than the media tonight. Jungkook frowned. Good. RM actually smiled faintly at that. That's the problem. Another small wave of laughter moved through the room. Tiny, tired, but healing in a way none of them realized they needed until now. Jimin looked around slowly at all of them again. And suddenly his eyes filled unexpectedly once more. Jin noticed first. Hey! The room quieted immediately. Jimin shook his head quickly. Sorry. Jungkook turned fully toward him. For what? Jimin looked overwhelmed again. He swallowed slowly. I really thought if I slowed everyone down long enough, eventually people would resent me. Silence settled heavily after that confession. RM looked devastated hearing it spoken so honestly. Hobai sat down quietly nearby. Taehyung's expression softened immediately. Jungkook just stared at Jimin like his heart physically hurt. Jin spoke first this time. You seriously carried that alone? Jimin laughed weakly. I tried not to. RM shook his head slowly. No wonder you kept pushing yourself past the limit. Jimin looked down again. I didn't know how to stop. Jungkook answered softly before anyone else could. Then we stop you together next time. Jimin looked up immediately. The certainty in Jungkook's voice made his chest tighten all over again. There won't be a next time, Jungkook continued quietly. Not like this. RM nodded firmly. He's right. Then RM looked around at all of them carefully, and honestly, his voice became more serious now. This isn't only about Jimin. Everyone listened silently. We've all been carrying pressure like it's normal. RM leaned back against the table tiredly. Tonight just exposed it publicly. Nobody argued because nobody could. BTS in 2026 had become something massive. Bigger than 7 people emotionally should have been expected to carry constantly. Global tour. Endless cameras. Expectations from fans, companies, industries. Somewhere along the way, exhaustion started feeling normal to all of them. That realization sat heavily in the room. Hobai quietly nodded. I think we stopped recognizing burnout because everyone around us acted like it was success. Taehyung muttered softly, that's depressing. True though, Jin admitted. Jungkook glanced toward Jimin carefully. And he hit it better than all of us. Jimin sighed softly. I didn't want everyone worrying. Taehyung immediately answered, well, congratulations, now everybody's traumatized. Even Jimin laughed again at that, tiny smile returning briefly. Jungkook watched him the entire time unconsciously. RM definitely noticed again. Eventually, RM sighed tiredly and pointed directly at Jungkook. You. Jungkook blinked. What? Stop staring at him like the world's ending every 5 minutes. The room exploded into laughter instantly while Jungkook looked betrayed. I'm literally sitting here peacefully. Taehyung nearly choked laughing. Peacefully. Jin shook his head dramatically. You threatened corporate destruction 3 separate times tonight. Jungkook muttered. Deserved. Jimin looked down, smiling helplessly now. The warmth spreading slowly through the room felt strange after such a brutal night. But maybe that's exactly why it mattered so much. Because underneath the chaos and scandals and pressure, they were still 7 people trying desperately to hold on to each other through it all. Eventually, RM checked the time and groaned softly. It's almost 4 in the morning. Hobai looked horrified. Seriously, we've been fighting corporations for like 6 hours, Taehyung muttered. Jungkook finally stood slowly before looking toward Jimin. You're done for tonight. Jimin raised an eyebrow slightly. Done. Correct. You're really committing to the bossy thing. Jungkook answered immediately, yes. Jin pointed toward them both dramatically. I can't believe this became real during a crisis. Taehyung, Jimin groaned softly in embarrassment. But even while hiding part of his face again, he looked lighter now, safer somehow. Jungkook noticed every small change immediately. RM gathered papers from the table quietly before speaking again. The official statement tomorrow will focus on recovery and postponement discussions only. Jimin tensed slightly. Postponement, RM nodded carefully. Temporary. Then more gently, nobody's discussing replacing you anymore. The relief that crossed Jimin's face happened too quickly to hide. Jungkook saw it instantly and his chest tightened painfully again, realizing how terrified Jimin truly had been this whole time. Jungkook stepped closer quietly. Hey! Jimin looked at him softly. Jungkook lowered his voice. Believe us now? Jimin's eyes became emotional again immediately. He laughed shakily under his breath. I'm trying. Jungkook nodded once. Good. The members slowly started leaving the conference room afterward, exhausted beyond words. Staff outside the hallway scattered quickly once they realized BTS members were finally done with emergency meetings for the night. Security escorted them back toward the private elevators, while Las Vegas remained glowing and restless beyond the hotel windows. Jimin walked slower than everyone else now, exhaustion finally hitting him fully after the adrenaline faded. Jungkook immediately matched his pace without thinking. RM noticed again, but stayed quiet this time. Inside the elevator, silence settled comfortably around them for the first time all night. Nobody arguing, nobody panicking. Just exhaustion and emotional aftermath lingering heavily between them. Jimin leaned lightly against the mirrored wall again while closing his eyes briefly. Jungkook watched him carefully. You okay? Jimin cracked one eye open. You ask that every 7 seconds now. Because you keep looking exhausted every 7 seconds. Taehyung quietly whispered toward Jin. He's gone. Jungkook immediately pointed at him without looking away from Jimin. I can still hear you. Jin started laughing again instantly. Even RM smiled faintly. Jimin shook his head helplessly while warmth spread across his expression again. The elevator doors opened onto their private floor. Security cleared the hallway quickly, while managers quietly informed them schedules were officially canceled for the next day pending recovery announcements. Jimin visibly relaxed hearing that. Jungkook noticed immediately too. See? Jimin looked toward him. Jungkook smiled softly this time. The world didn't end because you stopped. The sentence hit Jimin deeply. He looked away quickly again, emotional. Because maybe that was the real thing he needed to learn tonight. Rest didn't make him disposable. Weakness didn't erase his place inside BTS. And people who truly loved him weren't waiting for reasons to leave. Back inside the suite, the atmosphere finally felt peaceful instead of suffocating. Jin immediately collapsed dramatically across one couch. If anybody mentions the word restructuring again tonight, I'm retiring. Hobai laughed softly while grabbing bottled water for everyone. RM disappeared briefly onto the balcony for fresh air. Taehyung scrolled through quieter fan reactions, now flooding online after news of postponed announcements spread instead of restructuring plans. Fans are calming down slightly, he reported. Most people are just worried about Jimin now. Jimin looked guilty again automatically. Jungkook noticed instantly. Nope. Jimin blinked. What? No guilty face. That's not a thing. It's absolutely a thing. Taehyung immediately nodded. Confirmed. Jimin looked betrayed. You're all against me. Jungkook sat beside him on the couch again, close enough their shoulders touched naturally now. Wrong. Jimin glanced toward him quietly. Jungkook held his gaze. We're literally fighting for you. The softness in his voice silenced the room briefly again. Jin looked at the ceiling dramatically. I need this man to calm down emotionally. Jungkook ignored him completely. Jimin looked down, smiling faintly despite obvious emotion returning again. Then softly, carefully, he admitted something that made Jungkook's heartbeat stop for a second. I think this is the safest I've felt in months. Silence filled the suite instantly. Jungkook stared at him quietly while the others politely pretended not to react. Jimin looked embarrassed after saying it out loud. Sorry, that sounded dramatic. Jungkook answered immediately. No. Jimin slowly looked back at him. Jungkook's expression softened completely. It sounded honest. The air between them shifted again. Quiet, intimate. The members around them suddenly became very interested in absolutely anything else nearby. RM walked back inside from the balcony and stopped immediately after seeing the look between them now. Long pause. Then RM sighed deeply like a man too exhausted to process another emotional breakthrough tonight. I'm going to sleep before this turns into a full romance drama in front of me. Taehyung nearly fell off the couch laughing. Jimin covered his face immediately while Jungkook groaned softly. Please never say romance drama again. But despite the embarrassment flooding through the room, nobody denied it anymore. Not really, because after tonight, there wasn't much left to hide. One by one, the members slowly disappeared into their rooms, leaving behind half-finished water bottles, exhausted laughter, and the emotional wreckage of the longest night BTS had faced in years. The suite finally became quiet again sometime after sunrise started faintly coloring the Las Vegas skyline outside. Jin had fallen asleep almost instantly. Hobi disappeared while muttering about needing 12 years of rest. Taehyung left after giving Jungkook one final look that clearly said, "We are definitely talking about this later." RM paused longest near the hallway before quietly looking toward both Jungkook and Jimin sitting together on the couch. "Get some sleep," he said softly. Then after a short pause, he added carefully, "Both of you deserve a little peace tonight." Jungkook nodded once. Jimin looked strangely emotional hearing those words. RM noticed but didn't say anything else. Soon the suite doors closed behind him too. Silence. Real silence now. No executives, no managers, no conference rooms, just the sound of distant traffic below the hotel and the faint hum of air conditioning filling the room. Jimin leaned back slowly into the couch cushions while staring toward the windows. Jungkook stayed beside him quietly. Neither spoke for almost a full minute. Then finally Jimin laughed softly under his breath. "Did tonight actually happen?" Jungkook smiled faintly. "Unfortunately, yes." Jimin turned slightly toward him. "You really threatened to destroy the company publicly. Potentially." "Jungkook, what?" Jimin shook his head slowly while smiling tiredly. "You scared everybody." Jungkook's expression softened immediately. "I was scared too." The honesty in that answer changed the atmosphere again instantly. Jimin's smile faded into something quieter, more vulnerable. He looked down at his hands briefly before whispering, "I know." Jungkook watched him carefully. The exhaustion in Jimin's face looked clearer now that adrenaline finally faded. He looked emotionally wrung out. Fragile in a way he almost never allowed himself to appear around others. Jungkook lowered his voice gently. "Come here." Jimin blinked slightly. "What? You look like you're about to fall asleep sitting upright." Jimin laughed quietly. "Probably." Jungkook shifted slightly against the couch before lightly pulling Jimin closer toward him, slow enough that he could pull away any time. Jimin didn't. Instead, after one brief second of hesitation, he leaned carefully against Jungkook's shoulder. The moment felt impossibly quiet after everything tonight. Jungkook's heartbeat immediately became louder in his own ears, while Jimin slowly relaxed against him like he'd been holding tension inside his body for months without rest. Neither spoke. They just stayed there beneath fading night lights, while early morning painted soft gold across the suite windows. Eventually, Jimin whispered softly without moving, "You know this still feels unreal." Jungkook glanced down slightly. "What part?" Jimin smiled faintly against his shoulder. "The part where you apparently decided to become the most terrifyingly protective person alive overnight." Jungkook answered immediately. "Not overnight." Jimin slowly looked up at him. Jungkook's expression stayed calm, honest. "I think I've felt like this for longer than I admitted to myself." Silence. Jimin's breathing slowed hearing that. "How long?" Jungkook laughed softly under his breath. "You really want the answer right now?" "Maybe." Jungkook looked toward the windows briefly before answering carefully. "I don't know exactly." Then quieter, "But probably longer than I should have ignored it." Jimin stared at him silently. The closeness between them no longer felt accidental now, not after everything spoken openly tonight. Jimin swallowed slowly. "And you never said anything." Jungkook smiled slightly. "You think I was brave enough before tonight?" Jimin almost laughed again. "You threatened executives in front of legal teams. That was different." "How?" Jungkook looked directly at him now. "Because losing you scared me more than embarrassing myself." The sentence settled heavily into the quiet room. Jimin's expression softened instantly again. He looked down briefly before whispering, "You keep saying things that completely destroy my ability to act normal." Jungkook's lips curved faintly. "Good." Jimin shook his head helplessly. "Unbelievable." But he stayed leaning against him anyway, neither moving apart anymore. Outside, Las Vegas slowly woke beneath the sunrise while inside the sweet time felt suspended somehow, like the world finally stopped demanding things from them for one small moment. Jimin closed his eyes briefly before speaking again, quieter this time. "Can I admit something selfish?" Jungkook answered immediately. "Always." Jimin hesitated. Then softly confessed, "Part of me didn't want a night to end." Jungkook's heartbeat kicked hard again. "Even with all the chaos." Jimin nodded slightly against his shoulder, because for the first time in a long time, he stopped briefly searching for the words. I didn't feel alone inside my own head. Jungkook's expression cracked softly hearing that. He turned slightly toward Jimin more fully now. You're not alone. Jimin looked up slowly. Jungkook's voice stayed gentle but certain. Not anymore. The emotion in Jimin's eyes nearly undid him completely right there. Jimin laughed quietly to hide it. You really mean every word, don't you? Jungkook answered instantly. Yeah. Another silence settled between them. Warm now, safe. Jimin looked at him carefully for several long seconds before whispering something so soft it almost disappeared into the quiet room. I think I wanted this too. Jungkook froze. What? Jimin looked embarrassed immediately but didn't take it back. Us. The word hit Jungkook harder than anything else tonight somehow. Harder than corporate fights. Harder than panic, because this wasn't fear anymore. This was Jimin finally stepping toward him too. Jimin looked down quickly afterward, nervous now in a way Jungkook had almost never seen from him. He laughed softly under his breath. I didn't think you actually saw me like that. Jungkook gently tilted his head, slightly trying to catch his eyes again. How could I not? Jimin's breathing caught softly. Jungkook continued carefully. You're literally the person I look for first in every room. Immediate silence. Jimin stared at him speechless now. Jungkook's expression softened further. You think that happened by accident? Jimin's composure cracked completely after that. He covered part of his face briefly while laughing shakily from emotional overload. This is insane. Jungkook smiled quietly. Probably. No, seriously. Jimin looked at him again, eyes bright with emotion now. Do you understand what you're doing to me tonight? Jungkook answered honestly. Not fully. Jimin shook his head slowly. I spent months convincing myself I was becoming a burden. His voice lowered almost to a whisper. And now you're sitting here making me feel wanted so suddenly I can barely process it. Jungkook moved one hand gently over Jimin's fingers resting between them on the couch. You were always wanted. Jimin closed his eyes briefly hearing that, because maybe deep down that was the sentence he needed most all along. Not reassurance about performances, not headlines, not schedules. Just somebody looking at him honestly and saying stay. Jungkook watched him carefully before asking softly, what are you thinking about? Jimin smiled faintly without opening his eyes yet. How stupid I was. Jungkook frowned slightly. You weren't stupid. Jimin finally looked at him again. I almost walked away from all of this because I thought nobody would stop me. Jungkook's chest tightened painfully. I would have stopped you. Jimin's expression softened instantly. I know that now. The room fell quiet again after that. Then slowly, carefully, Jimin lifted one hand and rested it lightly against Jungkook's chest near his heartbeat. Small movement, but intimate enough that Jungkook stopped breathing for half a second. Jimin looked nervous doing it too. Still feels unreal, he admitted softly. Jungkook covered Jimin's hand gently with his own. Then get used to it slowly. Jimin laughed quietly. You really like saying things that sound dangerous emotionally. Jungkook shrugged slightly. You bring it out of me. Their faces had drifted closer without either noticing again. The exhaustion, honesty, and relief from surviving the night together stripped away every layer between them now. Jimin's eyes flickered briefly toward Jungkook's lips before immediately looking away embarrassed. Jungkook noticed. His heartbeat immediately lost all stability. The air changed completely. Neither moved for several seconds. Jimin whispered first. This is probably a terrible idea. Jungkook answered softly, probably. Jimin looked at him again slowly. And you still want to? Jungkook didn't hesitate. Yeah. Jimin's breathing became uneven. Then after one final second of hesitation, he leaned forward first. Gentle, careful, like both of them still couldn't fully believe this was real. The moment their foreheads touched lightly, Jungkook closed his eyes briefly. Relief flooded through him so suddenly it almost hurt. Jimin laughed softly under his breath at how nervous they both suddenly became despite surviving corporate warfare together hours earlier. We're ridiculous, he whispered. Jungkook smiled faintly. Completely. Neither pulled away, though. They stayed there quietly, close enough to feel each other breathe, while sunrise fully spilled across the room around them. And for the first time in months, Jimin finally felt safe enough to stop pretending he was okay. The suite fell completely silent after the manager finished speaking. Jimin stood frozen near the couch while panic slowly drained every bit of color from his face. Jungkook immediately moved toward him without hesitation. Hey! But Jimin barely reacted. His breathing looked uneven now. Fast, unsteady. Because this wasn't just another backstage clip anymore. This was different. The entire world was about to hear the exact sentence he never wanted fans to know existed inside his head. Maybe BTS would be easier without me in it. Jungkook gently grabbed his wrist. Look at me. Jimin finally did, eyes full of fear now instead of exhaustion. They can't see that. His voice cracked softly. Jimin, no. He shook his head quickly. You don't understand. The panic in his expression became worse every second. Army stayed beside us through everything, and now they're gonna hear me say something like that? Jungkook's chest tightened painfully. The manager spoke carefully from near the doorway. The clip is spreading very fast already. Jimin covered his face briefly with one trembling hand. This is a disaster. Jungkook immediately pulled his hand down gently. No. Jimin looked overwhelmed. How is this not a disaster? Jungkook held his gaze steadily. Because people are finally seeing how much pressure you were under. Jimin laughed weakly under his breath. Or maybe they'll think I gave up on BTS. Nobody who actually loves you will think that. Immediate answer. Immediate certainty, but Jimin still looked terrified, because deep down this wasn't about scandals anymore. It was about vulnerability. The entire world seeing the darkest thought he'd been secretly carrying alone for months. Jungkook moved closer carefully. You're not the villain for breaking under pressure. Jimin's eyes closed briefly hearing that. Then suddenly the manager's phone buzzed loudly again. He checked the screen once and his expression immediately changed. Worse. Jungkook noticed instantly. What now? The manager hesitated before answering slowly. Fans aren't the only ones reacting. Jimin looked up sharply. The manager swallowed hard. Major media outlets are reporting that internal sources believe one BTS member was already considering leaving before the Vegas concert. Silence. Heavy silence. Jungkook's expression went cold instantly. Jimin looked devastated, because now rumors weren't just spreading about exhaustion anymore. The world was beginning to question the future of BTS itself, and somewhere outside the suite doors reporters were already gathering downstairs waiting for answers none of them were ready to give yet. Then Jungkook looked directly at Jimin and said one sentence quietly enough that only he could fully hear it. If the world's about to pull us apart. His fingers tightened gently around Jimin's hand. Then this time I'm standing beside you where everybody can see. And downstairs in the lobby, cameras were already turning toward the elevators.